Here we are on day 3 of the Small Cats Symposium. It's an early morning here in Calgary in Western Canada, but it's such a pleasure to be with all of you once again. We had an amazing day 2 yesterday, ranging right from the introductory keynote by the cat specialist group from Cisneros, Christine Bradmoser-Versten, and here we are on day 3. We are going to crisscross the planet again. First, we're going to start with a young leader, then crossing continents as we look at different species, their needs, discoveries, innovations, conservation applications, and then we will work towards a panel at the end of our session today with funders, a key audience for all of us, I'm sure. So here we are and emerging on this journey again together. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for joining online. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, who's Meidina Fitriana. And she's a young conservationist from Indonesia. While working with Sintas Indonesia Foundation, she led the monitoring project for wild cats in the Leuser ecosystem of Sumatra. Because of her work in 2024, she was featured in the National Geographic Arabia magazine as a young conservationist leader. Currently, she's pursuing a master's degree at Washington State University in Pelham, Washington, and her research focuses on analyzing the density of the Sumatran tiger and the Sunda clouded leopard, as well as the occupancy of the Asian golden cat. Meidina, it's such a pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you.
Today, I'm going to share about our work in Sumatra, Indonesia, one of the largest rainforest, which is the Leuser ecosystem. We started this project in 2021, and this project was remarkably incredible. And we are really excited about the outcome and about what's coming in the future within this project. And first, I want to thank all of the collaborators, partners, and of course, the amazing donors who are already funding our projects. This is the map of the Indonesia, and Indonesia has 5 big islands where the Leuser ecosystem falls in the northern part of the Indonesian island, Sumatra. And this is one of the largest rainforests in Sumatra and especially in Indonesia, where we have a massive, I'm sorry, can everyone still see my?
Yeah, it's just fine. Yeah, we see the forest and we see the map.
All right. Yeah, so this is, one of the habitat remaining for the Sumatran tiger and also located between Aceh and North Sumatra province. And this ecosystem covers roughly 2.65 million hectares, spanning from lowland to upper mountain forest zones. And this is also one of the only place on Earth where you can find 4 key species coexist together, making the landscape an important global biodiversity hotspot. Like we have the Sumatran tigers, Sumatran elephants, Sumatran orangutans, and Sumatran rhino in this one big place coexist together. And all of these 4 species also endemic only to Sumatra Islands. And consequently, the Leuser ecosystem has been designed by the government of Indonesia through Act number 26 in 27 on spatial planning as the national strategic area, a key biodiversity area by the IUCN, and also one of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve of Sumatra. And for our project, we think that wildcats is so important, and this Leuser ecosystem provide the big biodiversity and also the prey species for all the animals, including the carnivores. So we want to see wildcats that exist outside of the national park but still in the protected forest of the Lauser ecosystem, including like in the highly deforested human-dominated landscape in Aceh. And then we also want to provide, the estimation of wildcats population in Lauser ecosystem because it's remain unknown. And as all we know that carnivore is really hard to detect and even studying them is so hard in the forest. And our objective within our project is to determine baseline population of Sumatra's wildcat in human-dominated landscape while identifying and mitigate the critical threats to their survival. So within our project, we focus on the camera trapping surveys, forest patrol, socio-economic survey, and lastly, we hope to have some, statistical model and publish a paper in the future, and hopefully what our findings within this landscape can be useful to create more conservation action for carnivores in the future. So our study area is outside Gunung Lauser National Park, like I previously have mentioned, and it was located in the southwestern part of Lauser and the southern part of Lauser. And these two study area has incredibly characterized forest where the southwestern area is a steep mountainous terrain and hardly to access, limited human access to this part of the forest. Meanwhile, in the southern part of Lauser, it's characterized as a lowland forest, and human can easily access this because uh, the place is so close to the main road, and all the local communities live so close to the forest. And within these two study area, we design a camera trapping grid. Uh, and because of the largest and the different size of the study area, we have different camera station. We develop a numerous camera stations differently. Where in this southwestern side we have 200 station of camera traps, and in the other side we have only 100 station. And for both of the study area, we cover roughly almost 400,000 hectares. And within this camera trapping surface, our team in the forest sometimes spend 15 days. That's just like the minimum days we spend in the forest while doing our activity, but can be extended as much as needed. Depends on the location of the camera traps and how far and accessible the camera station itself. Here I provide the team members' pictures as I really proud of them, and working with them is so amazing. And the other photos is like how struggling the team in the forest, setting the camera traps, testing it. And sometimes we cannot access our camera station by just walking because there's no, land access. So we have to use a speedboat just to get and to reach our camera station. And here I provide two photos of the human activity that we recorded within our camera trapping surface back in 2021. And we finished all of the installation of our camera trapping surface in 2023. So that being said, while we were installing our camera traps, we recorded 5 wildcat species in the Lauser ecosystem, from the top predators, Sumatran tigers, and then we have medium and small cat size species like the Sunda clouded leopard, Asian golden cat, marble cat, and leopard cat. Um, I expected that we have one more cat species, which is the flat-headed cat, but unfortunately, we didn't record anything about flat-headed cat in our study area. Uh, Maybe in the future, as this project, I believe, will continue this year. I hope we will have the updates about the flat-handed cat as well. And during our surveys in southwestern, or we call it Tarangun and Betung area, and the other southern area, we call it Soraya Bengkung, we we recorded a lot of camera imaging photos and also numerous photos of the wildcats itself. And as we can see here that the small cats species, we recorded like only a few, especially for the leopard cat. They really small and they used to live like close to the villages in disturbed forests. So getting their images in our camera trap is incredible, but also challenging. And for the marble cat, fortunately, we got like a great photos and a great number of images. But here we capture more photos of the clothed leopard itself, and especially in the southwestern part, because yeah, the southwestern part, like I previously mentioned, it was like undisturbed forest, hardly access to human. Meanwhile, in the other side, it's so close to the villages and local community can easily access this, and it was like a lowland forest. And in terms of the recording of our species. Here I have one of the marble cat photos. I have combined this together so it will create like a short video, and I thought it was so cute to share with everyone. Yeah. And besides the wildcats, of course, the cover traps record many more species. And here, like I have gathered some of the species we recorded from, the prey animals of the wildcat itself, like sambar deer, certain red muntjac, Malayan porcupine, lesser oriental chevrotain, and then we also have the Sumatran elephant, sun bear, and yeah, many more of the animals that we expected to see in the forest and see how diverse is our forest itself in terms of the biodiversity. And of course, we cannot forget about the aves species. And here we have the great argus bird, and then the hornbill, kingfisher, Salvador's pigeon, and many more. And don't forget about the primates as well. We have Sumatran orangutan, one of our four key species, and then we have white-handed gibbon, and of course, pigtail macaques everywhere, and the Thomas langur. And our second activity is the forest patrol, where we are implemented the smart patrol system for this. And during the smart patrol, we implement this activity simultaneously with the camera tracking surface because our study area is hardly accessed. So we want to make our surface efficient, and within this forest patrol, we try to collect more data of the carnivores in our forest, which were not recorded by the camera traps, just like the signs of the Sumatran tigers, Sunda clouded leopard, and if possible, for the other small cat species. And of course, we're not limited ourselves in just collecting more data about the cats, but also the other species like sun bears, and if we find the signs of the orangutan's nest and the other species that leave marks in the forest. And a part of that, our team also found some of the threats for the carnivores and other animals as itself, like the snares and then the illegal logging. And here we also provide I provide one photos of the challenging situation in the field where my field team has to cross this line bridge, like so thin, and they have to cross the river using this because there's no access to get to the career station. And within the forest patrol, we only can identify two species of wildcat signs, which is Sumatran tiger and Sunda clouded leopard. And here I provide a maps of the some of the signs of the clouded leopard and Sumatran tigers. I combine both of the signs just to have, insights about if these two sympatric cats overlapping in terms of their movement and their habitat. And as we can see here, we find that some of the signs are overlapping into each other, which is incredible because this data set provide more information about our wildcats habitat and ecology, and this is exactly what I want to study as well. And I'm in the middle of data analysis, and hopefully I can share my results soon with everyone. And during the forest patrol, my team also encounter the Sumatran tiger itself in the forest. Although we haven't encountered any other wildcat species other than, sun bear, Sumatran orangutan, just the other species of wildlife. So I thought it's also going to be incredible to share it with everyone. Yeah, that was a huge tiger and first encounter in the forest with our team, and everyone was so excited to share this news when the team come back from the forest. And actually, there's like a funny story behind these videos. So at that moment, we have one new member of the team joining us for these surveys. And that guy never been to the forest previously, but he wants to learn more about the conservation and the wildcats. So when they encountered this Sumatran tiger, he was so scared, and they, like the rest of the members said, like he almost fell down to the ground because he was so shocked to see, okay, this animal lives in the forest, and my team right now just encountering one, and they are doing a surveys just to capture the images of the tigers and the other wildcats. And the third activity of our surveys is the socio-economic surveys, where we want to gather local communities' perspective towards the wildcats. And the goal is to concept the human-wildlife conflict mitigation solution and sustainable financing that we hope we can design and implement for the next surveys on monitoring in our site. And here, I took a picture with one of the local communities that was attacked by a tiger, and he had to have a small operation because of that. And this guy works as a farmer, and by the time he was attacked by the tiger, he was working in his farm, and he doesn't realize that the tigers was already standing behind him, and there's no time to run, and within the big carnivores like Sumatran tigers, there's like a special uh, management and risk if you are encountering one in the forest, and there's also like a guidance of how you should act in the forest. But when you are in fact and in reality facing one of these big cats, you won't find any, or you won't think about like, okay, how should I react? Because the human instinct is just, okay, let's run. And this is like what happened to him, and then he got attacked. But luckily, even after the attack, he still have, the energy, and he still can walk a little bit and run directly to the local, to the other local communities that were close with him, and he got the perfect and the right timing of evacuation. And all of the hard work won't be possible without collaboration. And this is apply, I think, not only to our projects, but to everyone. And working alongside the rangers and local community, it's been amazing. And most of our rangers were from local communities that live near of our study areas, and some were former hunters and poachers. And working with them is so incredible because they know the forest better than we do. And in fact that they work with us, and we can provide them with another livelihood source, and we can educate them about the conservation itself. It's so important because their voice is also what the other local communities that will hurt, and by working with them, we also ensuring the future of our forests and our conservation, and we secure our future as well for the next generation. And besides of working with the rangers, we also like 2 times have a sharing knowledge with the Panthera Malaysia team in our hometown and also in Malaysia, because we all knows that Panthera Malaysia has been successful in mitigating poaching in Malaysia. So sharing knowledge and working with them is also incredibly remarkable for us. And we also had a discussion with the local partner that help us in terms of the surveys and the monitoring. And we also had a great conversation with the Mongabay journalists. And because of this collaboration, some of our work was posted in the Mongabay news about the findings of the marble cat, leopard cat, and the other carnivores, which is so important because these cats is tend to be unstudied. And even though with the internet today, many people still don't know about the wild cats. So in terms of the statistical modeling, we hope that within our data, for my study itself, I study the density of the Sumatran tiger and Sunda clouded leopard. And I also want to know about the Asian golden cat occupancy, and whether the density of tigers and clouded leopards affect the occupancy of golden cat. And speaking of it, we also have a red list assessment for Indonesian cats, the IUCN of Indonesian region, and we are still working on it. So there's nothing that I can share at the moment, including for my own research itself. But hopefully, again, I hope I can share this, scientific papers with everyone as soon as possible. And looking forward, we also we'll continue monitoring wildcats and human wildcats interaction to get time series data. I can say that we are successful with our first survey, and now we are in the middle of preparing for our next surveys for the next 3 years. And we also will continue implementing Smart Patrol to better understand about the threat trend and implement human wildlife conflict mitigation solutions. And we want to reach, three groups of conservation. First, the conservation scientific community within Indonesia or also worldwide, which is what I'm doing right now, outreaching and sharing about our work. And second, we want to, have more discussion and have a decisions maker in public administration and relevant private companies, uh, as- and hope that they will support our work and donate for our project, because ensuring the longevity of the forest means we are securing our future. And of course, we want also to reach out the wider local community to gain support for the conservation of wildcats, their prey, and habitats. Uh, but also, there's no project without a challenge. We also still facing the challenge of illegal logging activities in our study area, and then human wildlife conflicts, and then challenging terrain and extreme weather. Like there's so many challenge. In fact, although it sounds like, oh, this project's maybe so cool, like we have been successfully gather all the objectives that we want from this project, but behind the scenes there's so many things happen, and so many emotional damage, so many stories to share. uh, and yeah, we also hope to collaborate more with our partnerships, universities, other stakeholders, so we can leverage resource and expertise to increase the impact. And by that, I say thank you everyone for your attention. Stop share.
Well, thank you, Meidina. That was incredibly inspirational, I think. And there were hearts and, well, right now even there are hearts and emojis flying around congratulating you, and so many great comments. When I was listening to it, I just thought of one word, and I think it's heroic. I mean, I think that the efforts are heroic. And uh, between the different challenges that you face in the field, from terrain to, dodging tigers, and you have hundreds of records of tigers, which is impressive. One, in terms of the conservation information, but also in terms of, the teams being out there, also dealing with the landscape where things are happening, outside of protected area, with logging and anti-poaching patrols. For me, it just sounds like the perfect combination of excellent science, action-oriented, community-involved work. And now you're bridging towards policy. I mean, it's I just applaud you, and I'm pleased on behalf of our small cat community, pass on our congratulations to the heroic team that is out there in the field doing this as well. Happily, we have a few questions. And so I'm just going to call on some folks. Yeah,
Yeah.
Julia Chase Gray, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and just asking your question of Meidina.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was incredible. I've done work in Sumatra on human tiger conflict and camera trapping, so I was like super excited to look at your project work. Have you collected any data on human tiger or human small cat conflict yet?
Yes, thank you, Julia. So within our socio-economic surveys in several villages in the Lausar ecosystem, We specifically choose the village that has experience in human wildcats conflicts. So we only gather the information about what was happened in the village and when that happened, and if there's like any attack of the tiger or other animals to the local communities, and also what the local villages needed in the future to resolve these human wildcat conflicts. So that's the only data we have, because in our first survey we are more focusing on the implementing the surveys first and see how it goes. So hopefully within our next surveys this year till the next 3 years, we can have more stories about human cat conflicts and more data to share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have actually some incredible data from near Lake Toba in the Batang Toru area. I don't know if you know that. Perhaps I can email you and discuss with you further.
I would be happy to be in touch with you, although I'm not sure I am the right person for that because I'm not working in Batang Toru, but I can refer you to someone else that I know working with the Batang Toru's research station. So yeah, please don't hesitate to email me, and I will connect you with some other people who knows better about that study area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good luck with your work.
Thank you.
Meidina, I'll just, as you're talking about different areas, it made me think, people debate around the world what needs to be done for conservation. And some say the only way to save wildlife is to have protected areas, and that everything else is not effective or not worth it. But you're not just working in protected areas, right?
We are, mostly our work is in the protected area of the Lausar ecosystem, but our study itself is like the first remarkable turning point of the unsurfaced areas where like human or our ranger itself never been there. And because the Lausar ecosystem is a big ecosystem, 2.6 million hectares acre, and most of the work of the carnivore focus on the Gunung Lausar National Park. Everyone knows that national park is like, they tend to do more study there because they think that, okay, having more data of the wildlife in national park is more important than outside of that. But that's not true at all, because these days we see that more wildlife habitat in outside of the national park and sometimes close to the local communities. So I think having a research outside of the national park in protected areas is still good. But if we can have more research under the unprotected areas, that will be incredible as well. And then we have another challenge, because some of the funders, they want provide money for unprotected areas. So so I hope we will have this conversation later on how like we can get a funding outside of unprotected areas for wildcats on the other animals.
I'm going to write that down. We're going to ask our funder panel about that today. Thank you so much. Another question, let's see here, from Victoria Barbosa. If you wouldn't mind unmuting and asking your question. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so thank you so much. Good morning, everyone from here in Brazil. Congrats for your work, Meidina. And I would like to ask you, like, how it's working in a threatened area like this, and considering you talked about consider the population densities. And here in Brazil, I usually work with videos rather than photos to facilitate this individual identification and working with density. And how can you perform this type of analysis with photos? And if there any other special reason for you to choosing photos over videos? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. To be honest, we use the camera trap from Panthera for these surveys, and the camera trap itself only taking photos, not videos, which is also incredible because we need more evidence of the cats, and we can use videos or photos in population densities as well, because all we need is the location of the cats in the forest, and if there's any capture recaptures, and then the locations of the cats, and how many individuals of the cats itself. So in terms of the analysis, I used that data, and then I use the R Studio with the package that's called Oscar for spatial capture recapture. We know that we have another package of spatially explicit capture recapture to analyze the wildcats population densities. But for my study itself, I use the Oscar one because I share that even though we have 100 photos of Sumatran tigers, but one of the other side, we have less images capture of the Sunda clouded leopard. So yeah, there's so many way to analyze the population densities, but that depends on what is your objective itself for your analysis. And working in the Trident area is incredible. I always want to work in my hometown, in the forest that my hometown have. It's not just about the landscape, but it's also about connecting with people there. And I love to be in the forest. So even though I've been going here and there and work in some other forest, but at the end of the day, I want to preserve what I have in my own forest.
Amazing.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I hope that answers the question from Victoria.
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you very much, Meidina.
Well, Meidina, I mean, there are so many people that are asking questions that are so enthusiastic, and of course, your contact information, you're willing to share it, which is wonderful. I know that there will be many being in touch with you. Thank you for starting our day 3 with such an inspiring talk. Thank you for what you do, and so many of the things that you said, coming from that community, the love of the place, and then putting it all together. It's an inspiration for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so happy that I can share my work with everyone. Hopefully we can have more work together in the future, and this networking lasts. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Great. All right. And with that, I'm very happy to move now to our first speed talk, being given by Gabriella, Dr. Gabriella Leighton, who's an ecologist and a small cat enthusiast in South Africa. Her PhD from the University of Cape Town investigated the effects of urbanization on the foraging ecology and pollutant exposure of caracals. She continues to study these incredible adaptable wildcats through her role as coordinator of the Urban Caracal Project. Dr. Leighton has broad interests in methods in ecology, habitat modeling, ecotoxicology, and carnivore conservation in changing landscapes. Thank you so much, Gabriella, for joining us.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So as Axel says, I'll be presenting some of my ecotoxicology work on the Urban Caracal Project. And I'm very lucky because my colleague Jacqueline Bishop gave a really wonderful overview and summary of the project earlier this week, so I can dive right in. So caracals are the largest remaining predator in Cape Town, which is a really rapidly urbanizing biodiversity hotspot with a major waste and pest management problem, like many rapidly urbanizing areas. So here we see that caracals really selectively forage along the urban edge, which actually puts them at risk of a lot of anthropogenic threats, but especially pollutant exposure. And so we quantified anticoagulant rodenticide or rat poison concentrations, as well as different spatial correlates for 102 caracals. We found that most caracals were exposed to these poisons. More than half were exposed to more than one compound, up to 6 compounds in a single liver, and 14% of these individuals had levels over 1 part per million, which is associated with sublethal effects in other carnivores. And so this really points to pretty widespread use of these poisons across the city, but also bioaccumulation, mostly via tertiary exposure through their prey, like small carnivores, reptiles, and raptors. So our top spatial models for the total concentration of these poisons showed that the increased use of urban areas, as well as vineyards, wetlands, and areas of more food service outlets, so places that had lots of restaurants and cafes, for example, as well as areas with higher NDVI, so vegetative greenness, and individuals with greater age were more at risk. So these were all risk factors for exposure, particularly for second-generation compounds. And these are the ones that are designed to kill with a single dose and are very persistent in the body. And so these compounds are all found in products that are readily available in supermarkets and shops in South Africa. So we see that poison use is really not uniform across this landscape. Hotspots really align with human waste, as well as food service areas and green urban infrastructure. And putting this together, we really need to be reducing the accessibility and legality of these poisons to try and decrease their use, especially around areas with restaurants, vineyards, and wetlands, and really shift towards more physical or integrated pest management approaches. And given that we know that organochlorines and metal pollutants, as well as novel pathogens, have been detected in this caracal population, this is a classic One Health issue. And so reducing these, the use of these rodenticides will benefit wildlife more broadly, but also domestic animals and human communities. So I'd really like to thank my collaborators on this work, especially Jackie Bishop and Laurel Ceres, as well as the various partners and funders. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Amazing, really amazing work, Gabriella. And I'll just have a question or two. Others, you know, throughout the day, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. Just such amazing work. The age effect with the adults, you know, having greater exposure, I suppose, is that just because they have a longer life to be exposed more, or is it because of that they travel in different places, let's say, than the younger age classes?
I would say it is probably just an age accumulation effect. So those cats that are living longer are just feeding on prey that are more contaminated, and then that builds up in their liver over time. So none of these pollutants can be assimilated by the body, so they just end up being stored in tissues. And we looked at liver tissue, which is a really great way of looking at kind of long-term exposure, because once laid down in the tissue, that they don't really get mobilized again. And so, yes, it just seems that, you know, the older the animal gets, the more they accumulate over their lifetimes.
Amazing. And just the way you illustrate it all in terms of a One Health effect. I mean, even you've got to be worrying, I think, as a human, or worried as a human in these places when you see this kind of thing in the animals that are around you. We have a question from Rue Campbell. Rue, go ahead, unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yes, Gabriella, it's a lovely talk. And again, something that I'm involved with, so it was great to see your results. You did cut out for me because of my connectivity very briefly, so I might have missed it. But do you know why, or do you think you know why NDVI and wetlands are both positive effects? 'Cause particularly wetlands It's actually surprised me.
Yeah, so this is something that we found in our work with other pollutants as well, and wetlands consistently come up as a spatial correlate of exposure. And we think this is because wetlands are actually really big sinks for pollutants. So if you think about, runoff from rivers, from roads, from gutters, from pesticides that people are putting into their gardens or, industrial use, that all ends up in the waterways and then eventually into wetlands. And so we're seeing that the cats that spend more time in wetland areas, so have more wetlands within their home ranges or in buffers around where they were sampled, as well as cats that, when we look at their diet, are feeding on more wetland adapted prey, so things like geese and ducks and other animals that spend time in these wetland areas, they are more exposed to pollutants. And this is something we found for this rat poison work, but also for organochlorines and the metals and metalloids that we've been looking at as well.
Well, so they really are sentinels, and because that tells you that there's something pretty bad going on in the wetland area generally.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And
Okay.
I was resonating what was said yesterday about how small cats are such good indicators and are maybe better indicators than big cats for a lot of these systems, because they are so adaptable and persistent that they end up, remaining in these very developed areas, these non-protected areas, much more so than other species. And they've become kind of the de facto top predator in these areas now, and they can let us know about a suite of different risks that they're facing in these landscapes. So very useful indicators.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Rue, for that good question as well. Excellent, Gabriella. Thank you so much. And now we have the pleasure of moving on to Dr. Flávia Tirelli, who is a Brazilian biologist focusing on the ecology and conservation of neotropical small wildcats. She's affiliated with the graduate program in animal biology, and the Instituto Pro Carnívoros coordinates the Jeffries Cat Working Group and is a member of the IUCN Cat Specialist Group. Welcome, Flávia.
Okay, so I'm glad to be here, and I'm part of Felinos do Pampa project, and we work with conservation and science. This is one of our science projects, and tomorrow Dr. Marina Favarini will present about our conservation project. Don't miss it. So let's go. Where we work in southernmost Brazil and in Uruguay, and in this area is an ecotone zone between the exuberant Atlantic forest and the beautiful Pampa. The region is a global biodiversity hotspot for felids with 8 species. Yes, 8, and 6 are small wildcats. But the region, it is increasingly shaped by human land use. And this came from our main question for this study. Do these species exhibit activity spatial-temporal interactions characterized by significant aggregation or segregation that facilitate their symmetry? So, using a robust camera trap effort in 27 distinct areas, protected and non-protected areas, as Meidina was talking about, and using more than 400 camera trap sites, we recorded 1,000 independent records of felids. We found the 8 species, including the 6 small wildcats. And the promata, this area with the point, with the icon, exhibit the highest diversity values for both indices that we analyzed. This area is in Atlantic forest, but is very close to the cotton zone, so probably it's because of that. And Margay and Joffrey's cat represent the vast majority of records after ocelots, Southern tiger cat, jaguarundi, and munuai, which is the ghost, the munuai's pampas cat. Also, we recorded domestic cats among the small wildcats. So to answer our question, we estimate time to encounter across each species pair and in each area using a multi-response permutation procedures. And what we found that margay avoid significantly southern tiger cat, mono-eyes pampas cat, ocelot, and Joffrey's cat. And southern tiger cat avoids margay and ocelots. Jaguarundi avoids Joffrey's cat, margay, and the segregation wasn't significant for ocelot, which is kind of interesting. And Joffrey's cat avoids pampas cat and margay, but in one area, in this area, the segregation wasn't significant. This is also interesting. And our ghost, this species there are almost no information, and here's one of the first information of ecology of this species, which is mono-eye pampas cat, and now we know that they avoid margay and Joffrey's cat in the savannas, in the Uruguayan savanna. So significant spatial and temporal segregation was found in more than 92% of the interspecific comparison analyzed. These preliminary findings suggest this invisible dance. So the fine scale segregation is the mechanism that allows coexistence in this human landscape. So it's not just about presence or absence, but behavior adjustments in response to presence of competitors. So we still need to have more steps. We still are analyzing more data, and we have more data to include and more species. And I hope soon we have this published. So thank you. And is that.
Really incredible work across all these species, isn't it? And to find all those relationships, or dare I say, maybe antagonisms. And as you discover that, would you be able to comment at all, like what is it that allows, there's a behavioral adjustment, but is there anything particular about the habitat that also allows them to segregate, if you will, and to coexist in some ways?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that the habitat help them, and the specific behavior also. For example, margay is more arboreal, and nocturnal, and jaguarundi is diurnal and live more in the ground. So I think these small adjustments and also the research that there are in vegetation also change this fine scale avoidance among them.
Yeah, and actually, just on that point of margay, Victoria Barbosa has a question. If you wouldn't mind unmuting, Victoria.
Of course.
Hello, Flávia.
Hello.
Nice to meet you again.
Hello.
And talking about the margay, actually, it's like I'm thinking on how can we analyze the activity pattern, like thinking about the arboreal straighten use. It's like, I don't know if you put camera traps on trees, or is like the segregation time, can they be avoiding more the habitat use than the pattern of time? I don't know if in English I'm being clear enough, but we can talk later after to tell you better my question.
You can ask in Portuguese if you want.
Yes, can I? Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Axel. Flávia, então, pensando assim, tipo, eles estão evitando num padrão temporal, ou eles estão evitando num padrão um padrão físico, né? Então, no extrato. Tipo assim, eles não estão realmente andando naquele período que vocês estão conseguindo pegar eles nas câmeras, ou na verdade esses bichos estão só acima dessas outras espécies que eles estão evitando. Então, na verdade, não seria um padrão de atividade tão especial assim, né? Enfim, comentar um pouquinho dessa diferença de extrato, porque a gente sabe que o maracajá é quase um primata, né? De vez em quando. Obrigada.
De nada. I will answer in English so everybody a little bit understands. So Victoria wants to know about because margay is arboreal, it will be a different or could be a different because they use this arboreal thing. That this species is more arboreal than the others. But as our camera traps were not on the top of in the middle of some trees. They are in trails, and the species that are most abundant and far was margay. So margay also use a lot of trails, and this analysis observe the time, like one species pass, so how many days or hours the other species pass. So in that exactly same camera, so it analyzing the space and the time when one species cross after the other. So if they are avoiding or if they are aggregating. So I don't know if I answer your question, but our number of records of the margay shows that we can surely work with them in the ground, because they really to walk among the vegetation, they walk on trails. We have data with camera traps showing that they have the nests. Sometimes they eat on the arbor in the trees, but their other activities are in the ground. So
yeah, amazing, very good, thank you. That's excellent. Great question as well. Good answer. Thank you so much, Flávia. Really inspiring work. Thank you so much. And with that, we will move on to, I believe it's a video from Cristiar. We'll have the video, but we also have a no rule on to answer questions afterwards. Now, I should just say for Cristiar, here we have a biodiversity conservation scientist who holds an education from Oxford and led interdisciplinary studies on ecological monitoring and conservation governance. She's dedicated to integrating scientific evidence into international policy with a proven track record in research collaboration and translating complex findings into actionable conservation strategies.
Greetings everyone. Today I would like to present about the new records of the flat-headed cat across patchy habitats in an unprotected Bornean corridor area. To give you some context, we have been working in a corridor named Betarum Landscape, and it sits between two national parks in Indonesian Western Borneo. And as you can see here, the landscape has multiple land use from agriculture, customary forest, and also restoration concessions. And it has the main provincial roads that connecting the capital city to Malaysian border. With this context in mind, we have two objectives. We would like to understand the diversity of terrestrial wildlife in multi-use landscape, and also we would like to understand wildlife occupancy in areas close to established road infrastructure. With that purpose, we have a camera trapping project that has been done from September 2024 to October 2025. We have 3 blocks of camera trap. Each block consists of 30 camera trap stations, size 2 by 2 kilometers, to understand the wildlife diversity at the landscape level. And also we have 31 camera trap stations that have been placed less than 200 meters from the edge of trunk road to understand the occupancy close to road. So we have successfully deployed 116 stations, and from these stations we found 3 stations with 4 detections. 2 of the detections occurred in peat swamp forest, and we also found 2 detections in 1 station in mixed agriculture areas, and also another detection also in mixed agriculture areas. And interestingly, we found these 2 stations are quite close to the main road, which is less than 200 meters from the side of the trunk road. And what we can see is the pattern here that the flat-headed cat can be found with water pools quite close to camera trap stations, and to the best of our knowledge, there has not been publication about the occurrence of flat-headed cat in this landscape and also in the northern side of the Indonesian Western Borneo. So this is a very interesting and new record from our project. An additional detection here, we found that when we deploy one of our camera traps, we found an infant of flat-headed cat in Pittsburgh Forest, and we also have another project to understand wildlife diversity in isolated forests quite close to farms, and we found two detections in the same in two stations with flat-headed cats. So looking at these results, we confirmed that this corridor has a very valuable meaning of flat-headed cat occurrence, and this remains unprotected, and this should be considered about the management of this area to protect the endangered flat-headed cat. And also hunting still remains as a major threat. So with this presence of close to roads, it means that the hunting pressure may intensify for flat-headed cat. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and we would like to thank communities, teams, and donors in supporting this project. Any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.
Wonderful. And as she said, you can email with questions. Nurul, if you're on, I would just have a quick question for you. It's really amazing the association, between flat-headed cats and the peatlands in this area and wetlands in general. Peatlands and wetlands are one of the most endangered ecosystems in the whole world. Is there particular pressure on those types of ecosystems in this region?
Okay, so thank you for your question. And gotta say, yeah, it's kind of hard to do the survey in those areas. Like our field team faced so many struggle where deploying the camera traps. And beside of that, because we deploy the camera traps and the weather in Indonesia, it's kind of hard to predict. So we have like a bunch of camera not operated correctly because of the weather, and also there's flood on it, and because the habitat there, the habitat that flat-headed cat found is like in the patch areas and also the flood that I mentioned before. So we have so many camera traps destroyed by that. But fortunately, we got like 4 records from that, which is it's really amazing. And I think, yeah, that's the most challenging part, like the accessibility to that place and the camera that we have.
And as you say that, this is why I find these things so heroic, to be able to get these records of species that are hardly known in very remote areas. And I say this to everybody on the call around the world. We talk about objectives and results and everything like that, but we know, I think all of us who've done a lot of time in the field, we know so many things can go wrong, the challenges and such. And so for me, the journey should be applauded as much as the end game, just that tremendous effort out there that all of you are doing. Thank you, Nurul. That's really insightful as well. Terrific. All right. Okay, and excellent. So now we have the pleasure of welcoming Sandra Lai, who is an ecologist and carnivore researcher specializing in canids and small felids. Her research examines movement ecology, behavior, and life history traits of mammals in extreme environments with a focus on understanding adaptive mechanisms that enable species to survive and persist in challenging landscapes. Welcome, Sandra.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see the full screen?
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Today I'm going to talk about work I did with the black-footed cat working group on the mortality factors and survival of black-footed cats in Central South Africa. We heard about black-footed cats yesterday, so I'm going to go directly to the study. Jumping right in, there were 2 study areas in Central South Africa, Bainfontein, a nature reserve, and DR, a mixed sheep and game farm, where the Black-footed Cat Working Group has been conducting a long-term intensive VHF tracking project since 2005. Out of the 59 radio-collared adult cats that were tracked from 2005 to 2020, 38 mortalities were recorded. There were a number of undetermined causes of mortality, but out of the ones where cause was determined, the most important was intragill killing, which was done by black-backed jackals and caracals. The second major cause of mortality was disease, mainly kidney failure due to confirmed or suspected AA amyloidosis and 1 case of pneumonia. It is known that black-footed cats are genetically predisposed to AA amyloidosis, which usually causes kidney failure. When we divided by study area, we saw that on Bainfontein Nature Reserve, the main cause of mortality was intragill killing, while on DR, which is a private land where jackals and caracals are killed for predator control, the main cause of mortality was disease. So we conducted a survival analysis to see if adult black-footed cats were surviving better, where jackals and caracals were less present. Results showed that annual survival rates were actually similar and low on both study areas. So annual survival rate was 0.62. And in conclusion, adult annual survival rates were relatively low for a small white cat, highlighting the vulnerability of this population in South Africa. Intragill killing was a major mortality driver, but not additive to mortality from AA amyloidosis. Predator control on private lands did not improve black-footed cat survival. So what seems to be happening is that disease prevalence is similar on both study areas, but weakened sick individuals are more likely to be killed by predators on Bainfontein. In terms of conservation and management, there is a need to understand the prevalence, transmission, and contributing factors of AA amyloidosis in wild black-footed cat populations. For predator protection, we heard about the importance of burrows as shelters for black-footed cats yesterday, so it's useful to promote a healthy community of fossorial species, especially spring hares, since burrows help cats escape predators. So thank you for your attention. I want to thank the Black-footed Cat Working Group, especially Alex Liva, the project leader. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Panthera, for organizing this incredible conference. I'll take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I mean, it's so intriguing in so many ways. Sometimes I'll talk about inconvenient truths, and one of the inconvenient truths here is one cat killing another, isn't it? And so it's so hard. But what's so interesting is that you've made this comparison between different sites, and still disease plays such a factor. If I remember correctly, black-footed cats are the second most inbred cats in the world, I think, by heterozygosity, next to sand cats. Is it just a genetic? It's hard to know, I know, but is it primarily because of the genetics? Is it exposure? Or even if you don't have the answers, what is it that we need to find? And the last thing I'll say is, I think I also remember that it occurs in captive populations as well. So what does that tell us?
Actually, not that. I don't really know about disease. I'm more of an ecologist, so I'm not so sure. I know it has been studied more in captive black-footed cats, and this genetic predisposition, which in captivity, they were not sure if it was inbreeding or not, but in the wild, the prevalence is quite high as well. So it's a relatively restricted species, so probably a combination of both. I think one thing that can be looked in the wild would be maybe connectivity between populations. And for black-footed cats, not many populations are studied, actually. So for connectivity, it's a bit hard to know. Also, dispersal and between populations is not that well known because it's hard to track. But I think that's one thing that could be a future research avenue.
Yeah. But back to the integral killing just for a second. Do you think that if there are enough other species making enough holes for the cats to escape, then there could be coexistence even in the face of jackals and caracals?
I think it's always better to have more burrows, but I think coexistence is already happening. So in many ways, I think in areas where you have less like fossorial species, from what I've heard, there is more mortality as well. So in many ways, I think it's better to have more burrows. Caracals are very prone to intragate killing, actually, and the black-footed cat is very small, so it is very vulnerable, but they're not that bad at defending themselves. I think Martina has been telling me many times that they are actually able to also scare off jackals even. But the more way they have to escape predators, the better. And we haven't done actually survival studies on juveniles. I think it's really low survival actually for juveniles. So having burrows for the young is really critical, I think, for the populations.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sandra. I mean, because I love them anyway. I mean, I love them even more now because not only are they the successful hunter in the world, but they're brave and courageous enough to stand up to these bigger carnivores as well. Just incredible. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank
for
you.
sharing this with us. Yeah, amazing. All right. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Mohammad Shamsuddoha, who's a conservation biologist from Bangladesh with 15 years of experience in species and habitat conservation. He's currently a project manager at the Aranyak Foundation, focusing on cat species and community-based conservation initiatives. Welcome, Mohammad.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good evening. So, start. So, what can a name really do? For most of us, it's an identity. But for the fishing cat in Bangladesh, a name can be the difference between life and death. Locally known as mecho bug, this small cat carries the weight of the word bug, that means the tiger. So today I'll show you how tiger history and the linguistic association with tiger are driving this species toward death. While fishing cat is vulnerable globally, here in Bangladesh it is endangered. It's a strange irony that Bangladesh is one of the strongholds for those cats to live, but it is also one of the most dangerous too. Why? Because they don't hide in deep forests. They live right in our own backyard, and this creates constant conflict with the people. To understand the crisis, we conducted a systematic analysis of media reported killing in Bangladesh between 2020 and 25. The numbers are concerning. In just 127 incidents, 174 fishing cats were involved in conflict. We looked at the 127 cases and wanted to see what villagers actually called these animals. Over 65% of people called it a mecho bug, literally the fishing tiger. Nearly 1 in 5 people directly identified it as tiger, and some also identified it as leopard, some fox or civet, but less than in 8% of cases, they used the cat word. I mean, they identified it as cat. So when people see this animal, they don't see a small wildcat, they see it a tiger. And when you see a tiger, you are scared and you don't think to save it. You just want to get rid of it. Generally, people kill wild animals to protect themselves and their livelihoods. But this data tells a different story. Only 28% of these conflicts were about protecting assets. The more shocking is that the more than half of the killings happened because of mere sighting. A fishing cat does not have to steal a single chicken or fish to be killed. It just has to be seen. In short, the visibility equals to a death sentence for a fishing cat. So how do this cat actually die? In 90% of cases, it is a group killing. Almost half of these incidents involve a full-scale mob. And these tell us that the tiger myth acts like a siren. When they see a cat, fishing cat, it pulls out the entire community together to eliminate the threat. When a crowd of 100 of people arrives, the fishing cat has zero chance to survive. So this brings the real legal challenge. You cannot prosecute an entire village who are afraid of tiger. When a conflict breaks out, the data shows that the villagers and forest department appears in 60% of cases. Meanwhile, the law enforcement agencies and the local administration are almost invisible. This is a huge problem because without the presence of the police or local leaders, the forest department is often left alone to face a mob of 100 people or 1,000. So what happens when the authorities arrive? Usually very little. In 83% of cases, the Wildlife Act is not implemented at all. Even when there is a response, it mostly passive. And actually, in a formal legal action, it happens only 2% of the time. The law is effectively a paper tiger because the killing are driven by the mob's fear of a real tiger. A verbal warning from an officer is not enough to change the behavior. To see where the danger is highest, we mapped those 127 incidents across 47 districts of Bangladesh. The redness you see, it represents the conflict intensity, and the dots are for the mob. The correlation is impossible to ignore. Where the dots are biggest, the map is the reddest. Our data leads to one clear conclusion. We cannot just ask people to stop killing those cats. We have to change how they see them. At first, we must have to debrand the tiger. As long as the word bug or tiger is attached to this cat, the mob will always react with the tiger hysteria. We need to targeted education campaigns in those conflict hotspots. And secondly, we need the police and local administration to step up. When they are absent, the law is invisible. So to save the fishing cat in Bangladesh, we don't just need better fences or better laws or more fines. We must first kill the myth before the myth kill the species. Thank you for listening.
Wow, Mohammad, that is quite a story. I mean, not a good story, but I like how you show the data. You say it straight. Talking about fishing tigers and paper tigers. Very interesting. I know it's probably very hard, and you talk about the importance of education, which is amazing. I wonder, are there any ways to make it more worthwhile for a village to have a fishing cat? What I mean by that is, if there are programs, could one design programs where we reward villages for by bringing them certain infrastructure, certain things that they need, some community-based benefit where it becomes a benefit to have records of fishing cats there. So on the one hand, you have the education, but maybe if there are even some financial mechanisms to help promote, coexistence.
Yeah, thank you. So in smaller scale, there have been some initiatives there are some NGOs and also some of the conservation NGOs and some of the universities. They are working on this issue, and they have some small scale initiatives, in the local areas when they have been working. Some group of people already have been working on this thing, and they wanted to brand as a cat, not the bug or tiger. So there are a lot of young people are stepping up, and they're actually taking part in rescue. So when they successfully rescue, there are some mentions in the social medias, and also they were given some incentives or some gifts just to encourage them. So in some personal scale or some small scale, there have been some initiatives already, but we have to scale it up, and we have to broaden this initiative or this understanding of treating it as a cat rather than a bug or tiger.
Yeah, very good. And there's a question from Nicholas Gavez, if you wouldn't mind asking it and unmuting Nicholas.
Hi, Mohammad. Great talk. Very interesting work. I was wondering if there was work targeting community leaders that may influence the community, maybe regarding these social or cultural norms regarding this like mob behavior, perhaps religious leaders or other leaders of particular communities in those hotspots. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's in some areas where people actually understand now that this is not a tiger, this is just a cat, who which have actually may have some resemblance with tigers or that kind of species, but it is not a tiger. So some of the people actually step forward, and also in some cases some of the religious leaders in their religious ceremonies, they also tell like that. And it actually mostly happens nowadays after an incident where cat killed. Then actually the elders, or some it does not take that much time to come people to stop them. People usually understands or hear it later after happening the incident. So they try to educate people and try to make them understand that this is not a tiger, this is cat, and this is just a cat. So yeah, you don't have to react it that way. So yeah, it has been happening, but in small scale, not that much in broader sense.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question and the answer to it, Mohammad. And this is a comment to many of you out there: is conservation is done by champions, but champions on the ground, who care. And so you're doing that, just like many in our small cat community around the world. So just really thank you. We need you, and you're making a difference. So thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. All right, thank you. And now we're going to have a recording for let's see, for Carolyn Sartor, who's a postdoctoral researcher at WAGRU at University of Oxford, where she works with landscape ecology and conservation genetics of carnivores in Southeast Asia and South America, investigating how changes in the landscape have been affecting their population genetics and connectivity.
Good afternoon. I am going to present our preliminary results of a study where we are estimating the impact of future climate and landscape change in the marble cat. Southeast Asia is a highly biodiverse region that has been undergoing rapid human population growth and landscape change. The smaller the size of natural areas remaining, the smaller are the populations that can inhabit those areas, and these populations that are usually more prone to the effects of inbreeding and genetic drift, reducing their fitness and leading to population declines that can in turn lead to local extinctions. The marble cat is an understudied small to medium-sized felid that's native to the forests of Southeast Asia, and although it's classified as near threatened, its populations are under decline, mainly due to poaching, habitat loss, and persecution for the predation of domestic animals. With that in mind, our main objectives were to model connectivity for the species in the region and analyze the impact of future land and climate change on population size and genetic diversity. To do that, we estimated the current population size and generated a habitat suitability map with camera trap data. We then modeled connectivity for the current climate and landscape, and using future landscape and climate variables, we estimated the connectivity, genetic diversity, and population size in the future for 3 socioeconomic pathways using the COLA package in R. So this is our connectivity model, and as we can see, the populations are highly fragmented, and the current higher connectivity are here in this area of Borneo, northern Myanmar, this part of India, and Bhutan. So this is a difference map where we can see the difference between the current connectivity and the expected connectivity under the SSP1. And we can see is a huge loss of connectivity here in Borneo and northern Myanmar and Bhutan, but an expected little bit of gain in some of the peripheral areas. Looking at the simulations, what we can see is that for both population size and genetic diversity, a decline is expected, with SSP1 showing the best scenarios and the 2 and 3 showing the worst ones. So in summary, what we could see is that the populations are currently fragmented, and some areas they are unlikely to sustain viable populations in the future, and the remaining populations are expected to become smaller with decreased genetic diversity. As next steps, we are still going to model more connectivity scenarios and increase the number of simulations. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please write to me.
Yes, and Carolyn isn't with us at the moment, but as she says, please write to her, because incredible study once again. And one of the realities I think we face globally is that when populations become more isolated, we need to see what to do. I mean, in some cases, we can move individuals around for genetics supplementation or even gametes around. Maybe these are the types of things that we go for in the transition as populations become more fragmented, more disconnected. But before that, we should preserve and conserve habitats and species. With that, we're going to go to a short break. Thank you so much. Grab a quick coffee or tea or water, whatever you have, and we'll be back in like 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Here we are. We are now moving on to some longer talks. And the first one is of a very inspiring success story in small cat conservation, in fact, for wild cat conservation in general. So it's my pleasure to be introducing Pablo Araujo, who's an early career researcher who recently completed his PhD at the Technical University of Madrid on the use of remote sensing and GPS telemetry to support Iberian lynx reintroductions. He now works as a movement ecology technician at the Natural Heritage Foundation of Castilla y León, where he continues his work on lynx while applying similar approaches to study the ecology and conservation of other large Iberian carnivores. Welcome, Pablo.
Hello, thank you, Axel, for the introduction. I will share my presentation. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah, and then just there it is. Absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Axel, and thank you to Panthera for organizing this symposium and for giving us the opportunity to present our analysis on the movement ecology of the Iberian lynx. I would start with a brief presentation of the species, the Iberian lynx, which is a medium-sized felid that inhabits only the Iberian Peninsula. This is Spain and Portugal. And there is a species that prefers and selects Mediterranean forests, which are a type of habitat that is composed of moderate covers of trees, of shrublands, and of pastures. So it's a very heterogeneous landscape. And it likes a lot these habitats because it finds refuge in the shrublands mainly, and also usually these habitats are associated with high densities of rabbits, which are their main prey. So, as you may all know, in the beginning of the 21st century, the species was highly endangered. It was considered to be the most endangered felid in the world, because there were only 94 lynxes remaining in two isolated populations in the region of Andalusia in Spain, as you can see here in blue. This prompted urgent conservation actions that were funded by the European Union through many different life projects, and that consisted on the mitigation of mortality causes, the management of the habitat and its prey, the rabbit, the implementation of a captive breeding program that currently has 4 captive breeding centers, 3 in Spain and 1 in Portugal, and the start of a reintroduction program that would reintroduce these captive bred individuals into the wild to create new populations. And also there was a big effort put onto monitoring all the reintroduced lynx through genetic data, camera traps, VHF collars, and most importantly for this talk, GPS scholars, which have given us a lot of information to study the movement ecology of the species. So this is a highly successful story of a recovery of a species, and because of that, currently we have more than 2,400 lynxes as data of 2024, and in 23 population nuclei, but some of them are already working as a metapopulation, as you can see in the nuclei number 2, where this metapopulation has several subpopulations where where individuals exchange and move in between. So now the IUCN has reclassified the species as vulnerable, which is great news. So this presentation is based mainly on the analysis of this big GPS dataset that was obtained after the monitoring of all these reintroduced lynxes. Currently, we have more than 160 lynxes monitored with quite equal sex ratio, 80 males and 80 females, and more than 146,000 locations. Also, even though the majority of them are captive born, like 2/3, also we have 1/3 of them which were wild born, which allow us to compare the different behaviors to see if the captive born are actually behaving in the same way as the wild born counterparts. And most of the data is collected at a 4-hour sampling rate, one location every 4 hours. But also we are starting to have some data with 1 hour or 2-hour sampling rate. And this is thanks to a small project that was funded by Panthera through the Small Cat Action Fund, which allowed us to monitor and to track some subadults to study the natural dispersal of the species with high resolution. So our analysis started wanting to classify the different movement phases in the GPS tracks of the Iberian lynx. And we wanted to do this in a very detailed and rich way. So in the end, we achieved to classify 5 different movement phases that you can see illustrated here, which are apos-release dispersal, transient residences, dispersal, home ranges, and excursions. Here I present you the case of one particular lynx that exhibited these 5 movement phases. This is not always the case, but it's quite illustrative. This individual was released and it followed the light blue locations through what we classified as a post-release dispersal, and then it settled in a transient residence, a small residence area that then it was abandoned. When it was abandoned, it started a dispersal that you can see in dark blue locations here, before settling in a more stable home range that was bigger and that you can see in red here, in dark red. And then also from the home range, it undertook several excursions to explore further the area. So we applied this classification to all of our lynxes, and we found a great diversity of movement tactics, defined as the different combinations of movement phases. So we saw that some lynxes directly established a home range, as you can see in the upper left, which is great. This is the desired outcome for every reintroduced lynx. But other individuals displayed a total opposite pattern and dispersed very, very long distances through the landscape. Then also we had some individuals that showed a more moderate pattern. They started dispersing through the blue dots and then established in a home range. And then other individuals just established several transient residence areas before settling a home range. So high diversity. But we see that the most common tactics for captive born and for wild born were the post-release dispersal followed by the establishment of a home range and then some excursions, which is a great outcome. Also, wild born showed even a better outcome, which was just establishing a home range after being released. So this is probably one of the reasons why the use of captive-born individuals has been so successful in the recovery of the populations of the Iberian lynx. And then we wanted to investigate if captive-born individuals had any particular behavior that was different from the ones that were born and raised in the wild. And in some residents, in the residential patterns, we found a very interesting result. We found that for captive-born adults, for wild-born adults and wild-born subadults, all of them showed the typical pattern of arrangement of the species in which the male shows a significantly larger home range than the females. However, for the captive-born subadults, we didn't see any significant differences between the two sexes. So this could have been an issue, but then because the captive-born subadults show the natural pattern, we believe is something that is corrected as soon as they get more experience in the wild. Also, we found differences in the non-residential patterns. We found that captive-born individuals were moving more slowly after being released in the post-release dispersal, and then established transient residence areas that were smaller than in the wild-born individuals. They have transient residence areas that were bigger and moved faster when they were released into a new area. So these two metrics, movement metrics, are indicative of a cautious behavior in the captive-born individuals. Then we use also the GPS data to evaluate if the use of soft releases is better than using hard releases. Soft releases is when an individual, when he's moved into a new area, is first enclosed in a acclimatization pen or enclosure to facilitate the acclimatization to the new area. So here you can see one in one of the populations of the Iberian lynx. And because these enclosures for the Iberian lynx are particularly big, they are more than 1 hectare and are very expensive to build, and also imply a lot of logistical challenges of building them in the middle of the field. We really wanted to know if they were worth it, if they were useful to improve the outcomes of the reintroductions. So what we found is that yes, they are useful, but with a but. And the but is that as long as the individuals that are released into the enclosure are kept there for a prolonged time, so that they have time to get used to the new area. And we found that all the different demographic groups had more than 50% chance of establishing a home range in the reintroduction area if they were kept more than 46 days, which is approximately 1 month and a half. And these individuals, the ones that were kept for longer, also showed shorter post-release dispersal distances, which make them less prone to mortality risks like roadkills, for example. Then we analyzed the habitat selection patterns, and we wanted to see if these selection patterns changed and vary depending on the different movement phases, on the 5 movement phases that we identified in our previous study. For this, we used test selection functions in which, here in black, you can see the step, which is a couple of 2 GPS locations. And in the end location, we compare what are the conditions of the habitat here relative to how are the conditions of the habitat in artificial locations that the lynx could have accessed, but it chose not to. And we use this method and combine it with several environmental variables related to natural cover and anthropogenic factors. And we found quite interesting patterns that reflect the high behavioral plasticity of this species. So here in these 2 plots, you can see different curves, 5 different curves, each related to one different movement phase. Also, you can see a horizontal line at 1. And if one particular curve is under this line, it means that the lynx, when it's in that particular movement phase, is significantly avoiding that cover. For example, in red, you can see the residence areas, and you can see that lynxes significantly avoid areas that have a lot of road density and a lot of imperviousness density, which is related to human infrastructure and urban areas. So while we see this strong pattern of avoidance in residence areas, we don't see it when they are outside of the residence area. As you see, like the confidence intervals overlap with one, so we don't have a significant response. However, we see that that significant response, although more moderate, for the excursions in relation to urban areas, and also for post-release dispersals here in light blue, from 30% more, 20% more or less cover. However, for the dispersal, they still do not significantly avoid them, and they show a lot of tolerance. And this may be one of the reasons behind the high amount of roadkills in the species. They live in a highly fragmented landscape, but also they show quite a lot of tolerance when crossing roads, which is can be good for connectivity, but it also implies a lot of deaths and is the main cause of mortality now for the species. And also, we can see that it's not only important to separate the movement phases as residential or non-residential, but even if it's possible to put more effort into dividing the different non-residential classes, because they can imply different responses from the species that then can have implications when modeling connectivity. Also, we found that lynxes preferred and selected for areas with more refuge when they were post-release, when they were released into a new area. You can see here in light blue the response of the post-release dispersal. And you can see that they selected quite high levels of shrubland and moderate to high levels of terrain ruggedness, which is associated with rocky areas. Both in shrublands and in rocky areas, they can find a lot of refuge. So they are prioritizing that right after being released. And then we used the home range habitat selection model to project habitat suitability in the Iberian Peninsula. And we want to intersect this spatial information with new estimates and new reliable estimates of rabbit density, which have been really hard to obtain, that are currently the Life Iber Conejo project has produced recently. So we want to intersect these two layers to find areas that are both good for habitat suitability and for rabbit density, and they have available prey too. And also, we are currently working on the connectivity of the species using the habitat selection model of the dispersal movement phase. And we are actually trying to identify how would change the connectivity network with the creation of new reintroduction areas that you can see here in pink. In particular, here I want to focus in this reintroduction area in the north of Spain. Is actually the first Iberian lynx population since the recovery that is in the north of the Iberian Peninsula, which is the population of Cerrato Palentino in Castilla y León. And here we are trying to get into more detail with the movement ecology analysis using high resolution data. This high resolution data comes in the form of LiDAR data of high spatial resolution of 10 meters. You can see here the tree cover density with areas with more tree cover in yellow. And we want to intersect and create models using GPS data that is currently being collected at one location per hour. This movement data is allowing us not only to distinguish between different movement phases, but also is allowing us to distinguish different movement behaviors. So we can see in the darker locations, the darker points, when the lynx has stopped for resting, and those that are in light color, light green or light blue, are associated with movement from the species. So this, for example, is allowing us to check how the habitat selection patterns when the animal is resting or when it's moving. And we can see here in the y-axis, the broadleaf cover, broadleaf tree cover, and in the x-axis, the shrub cover, and in yellow, the areas that are highly selected. So we can see that when they are resting, they select for areas that have a lot of shrub cover and moderate tree cover. So they actually prioritize the shrub cover for refuge. And when they are moving, the pattern is highly contrasting. We see that they select for areas that have low shrub cover and low broadleaf cover, low to moderate broadleaf cover. And this is because it's probably easier for them to move in more open areas, but also because it's in these areas where pastures are present and where rabbits usually feed. So probably they are also getting involved into hunting behavior there. And then similarly, we are using these models to predict refuge suitability using the resting habitat selection model inside the population, so to in a different scale, in a more local scale. And again, we are intersecting this information with rabbit abundances information that we have collected to then identify priority locations where the lynx has both refuge and prey available, and to find where we can implement restoration and habitat management measures to improve the conditions in the population, because this population has just started and will start to receive more and more individuals through the years. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
What an amazing story. I mean, not just the overall story, but actually the movement data and the analysis that you've done here, the techniques, the correlations that you found, really quite incredible. We don't have too much time for questions, but let me just check here. All right, there's one, Julia. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. Amazing presentation, Pablo. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful overview of what has been done so far. I actually used to live in Andalusia, so I'm very invested in this story. But yeah, I was just wondering if you're adding accelerometers to your collars and if you're using accelerometer data at all. Thank you.
Yes, so I haven't worked with accelerometer data yet because the sample size is not big. The collars, the brand of the GPS collars that they were using through the reintroduction project did not have an accelerometer. So all these 160 individuals lack that information. But now the new collars we are using with higher resolution are starting to get that information. However, the sample size is not quite there yet, but it will be something that we would love to investigate in the future for sure.
Great, thank you very much.
That's great. And there's some more questions, but I can't resist asking one of my own before we move on. One of the things with reintroductions when you start or when you have very few individuals, and I just can't believe you've gone from you being the collective from 94 to 2,401 individuals. What a success story. But when first releasing animals, there aren't other animals in many cases. And potentially that can affect whether they stay or go. Over time, as the population has increased, do you see individuals not dispersing as far because there are others that they're meeting? So basically, they don't need to go as far to meet a mate, for instance.
So I haven't done any analysis on that yet. I know there are some researchers that are working on something similar to see like how they respond to the different densities of the population when they are released. But I can give you, some related information. What we see a pattern that is when a lynx starts dispersing and it doesn't find any conspecifics, it doesn't settle. And this also happens when they are released into a new area. So this is really problematic because the start of their introductions is particularly difficult. They don't have any neighbors, so they don't like it, and then they start dispersing. It's not only the habitat on the prey, they also want some other lynxes despite being somewhat solitary. So 2-3 years until the population starts to become super dense is kind of the sweet spot because they have space to settle, but they also have neighbors to attract them. So
exactly. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
And after that, the landscape starts to get clogged up with too many lynx. But yeah, wonderful. I mean, there's never too many lynx. Just so amazing. Thank you so much. We're gonna have to move on, but again, there's some more questions, and I know there's many that will reach out to you. Thank you to you and the greater teams in general for this amazing work.
Thank you, Axel.
All right. And with that, we have the pleasure of going and listening to Suranjita Roy, who works with the Wildlife Trust of India and is interested in the conservation of small, elusive wild cats. Her current work focuses on the ecology and conservation of wild felids through community-based approaches in the Eastern Himalayas. Welcome, Suranjita.
Hi everyone, I'm Suranjita from India, and today I will be talking about our ongoing project on small felids in the community forest in Northeast India. But before I move forward, why small felids or small cats? For the past 2 days, we have been discussing small felids extensively. However, if we look at the history of scientific wildlife research in India, it begins around the mid-1960s, and the research priorities were different during the British era and the early stage of post-independence. So, with the limited funding options and limited resources, most of the conservation work has been done on the charismatic flagship species such as tiger and elephants. But India is also home to an incredible diversity of 11 small felids. But despite this richness, research on small cats began much later. In fact, the prior studies on small cats were mostly the bycatch data, which were primarily designed for larger carnivores. As rightly highlighted by Karma in her presentation yesterday, small felids are often overshadowed by their own cousins, and because of this, there is still a knowledge gap on their overall ecology in terms of distribution and population status. So now it is only with the advancement of research tools, particularly the camera trapping, that we begin to systematically understand their ecology and distribution. But even then, most of the studies were conducted inside protected areas, and also they were species specific. Now in India, protected area covers only 5% of the total geographical landscape, which means a huge chunk of areas fall outside the protected area. Now, a handful of the studies have shown that these forests are rich in biodiversity and have the capacity to hold a good number of species which are ecologically generalistic. Also, with the increasing human population and the transition which is happening due to infrastructure expansion, agricultural growth, the community forests are becoming more vulnerable to habitat loss, and this is where it is important for us to understand how this threatened small felids will persist in the modified landscape. So moving forward, the objective of our study is to understand the diversity and the richness of the small felids and other mammals in the community forest, and ultimately to safeguard the key habitat for the species. I'd also like to inform that we have just completed our survey and the analytical process is still ongoing. So for today's presentation, I will be only sharing a glimpse of our result. Moving forward a little bit on our study area. If you can see the map, our study area is adjacent to the Eagleness Wildlife Sanctuary and is a part of the Common Protected Area Complex. So the Common Protected Area Complex is one of the largest continuous forest tracts in the Eastern Himalaya, and it consists of all the protected areas and the adjacent forests surrounding these protected areas. So now when we are walking in a community area and we are not talking about the community, then it's an incomplete information, as it is important for us to understand their beliefs and their perception towards the nature. As you can see, it's quite a vibrant community who follows Buddhism and their own animist practices. They also follow their own customary laws and conservation laws, and they observe a strict taboo on hunting on any felids. Quickly moving to the methodology. So we have followed a grid-based systematic camera trapping method where we have deployed 2 camera traps in 2 different positions in each grid to maximize the capture probability. We didn't use any bait, and the camera traps were kept for a minimum of 2 months, and they were completely monitored every month. These are the snapshot from the field during the surveys. The landscape is quite rugged and there were no trails. So the field work is quite intense with hiking the steeps, making the trails and going inside the forest. And sometimes we had to stay a week inside the forest to cover the trees which are deeper inside the study. Just a preliminary insight of the results which we have done is, so out of the 9 smaller cats present in Northeast India, we were able to establish the presence of the 4 cats in the community forest, along with 7 other mammalian species, which also includes vulnerable species such as an Asiatic black bear and endangered species such as Asiatic wild dog and red panda. Here you can see some of the other species which were present during the survey. We also found indirect sign of elephants, but so far there is no photo capture of elephant in our camera trap data. We have also captured 4 different morphs of Asian golden cat during our survey, which is golden, gray, cinnamon, and melanist, which I hope I have identified properly. But you can also see the relative abundance index of all the felids are a bit low, with clouded leopard being the lowest one and the Asian golden cat being the highest one with only 29 independent detection. We have also created a species accumulation curve for all the mammals pooled across night sample to evaluate the sampling quality and the survey effort needed for determining the species richness. Moving forward, we have also conducted socio-economic data to understand the community dependency on the forest resources. As you can see on the graph, the collection of the non-timber forest products is a vital activity for the community, providing an essential source of nutrition for the community. Among the 72 surveyed households, only 12 responded not engaging in any form of foraging, while the rest participated in collecting one or the more forest products. Now, the key finding of our studies is that it provides the first information of the felid species which are present in the community forest from this particular landscape. Along with that, it also set the baseline information on the presence of felids as well as other mammals, and from a foundation for the further research on small cat ecology in this region. It also provides an important information on the role of the community forest in complementing the protected area and serving as a sink population. With the findings in this community forest, the community did agree to designate a section of the community forest exclusively for the conservation of wild felids. Now, way forward, so to summarize, we need more intensive and focused ecological studies to understand the patterns, cohabitat use and co-occurrence of the felids, along with the factors which are having an impact on the co-occurrence among the species. Also to that, we are also planning to formally recognize the community forest in terms of CCA to promote and support the community stewardship. If you ask why community conserve area, well, when I'm talking in terms of Indian scenario, especially in case of Northeast India, with the increase in population, there is increase in deforestation as well, and also the communities are mostly dependent on the forest for their livelihood. So additional income generating sources are required to bring in to reduce the dependency on the forest, which is also a plan to bring the community-led ecotourism and capacity building to further strengthen the community action. During the 1.5 year working in this landscape, we have done a lot of community engagement and capacity buildings, which is engaging the school kids in naturalist training, or engaging the youngsters in naturalist training, sending the self-help group of the women from the community and the youngsters for an exposure trip to understand and to make them aware the conservation works which are done in other landscape. One of the success story which I would definitely like to point it out is the revival of the dying mask making art, which actually started with one artist and is now grown into a total of 9 artists. So we are trying to bring a lot of other income generating sources so that their dependency on the forest get reduced and we can conserve the entire area. We also gave them training on camera trapping and making the community self-sufficient to do this kind of ecological work. We are still waiting for our first manuscript, but meanwhile, a lot of popular articles has been published on our project, related works, and also on the landscape. Uh, that's all. With that, I would like to thank everyone for your kind attention. I'm also grateful to Panthera for organizing this wonderful symposium. As this is my first international conference, I am delighted to contribute, even in a small way, to the larger effort of conserving the small cats. Would love to receive any suggestion and questions. Thank you, everyone.
Well, that's terrific. And you know, the English expression, you could have fooled me that this was your first presentation in an international conference because it was done so well. So, and
Thank you.
sharing such a tremendous message as well. Yeah, I'll just wait a little bit for questions, but one thing I've been involved in West Africa and some other areas is thinking about how to make non-timber forest products like you were talking about in the forest worthwhile for communities. For example, by branding it as you know, fair trade, organic, conservation friendly, and then bringing that to Western markets to return more value, I suppose, to the communities, which hopefully then makes the forest itself more valuable and the conservation. Do you think there'd be any potential for that sort of thing?
Yes, definitely. We are also working on this. So our next step is to start marketizing these products in at least starting from the national level and then to put it in the international level. So we already started with the mask. We have been sending the community people to different events which are organizing in India, and there they have been selling their mask there. So we are about to start with other products as well. So we are involving the self-help group into this, the women's here, and then we are trying to rebrand their products and sell it in a more bigger sales price.
Amazing. And just another general observation is, you know, around the world, different countries have signed up to 30 by 30, basically the idea of preserving 30% of the planet by 2030. And the recognition is that that can't be done just by classic national parks, that it has to include OECMs or community-based conservation. And so one of the things that I think is fascinating that you're talking about here is you're looking at this classification as a community conserved area. What does that take? What does that involve to make that leap or to get that government type recognition as well?
I think the first step is to make the community agree on that. And it's a very difficult task because when we talk about community, they are very closely knitted population, and for them, nature is very close to their heart. So going and telling them that we need to protect this area or we need to officially make and give a designation for that area is a very daunting task. We are on the halfway on that. As one section of the community agreed to that, another section is still on the way to agree to that. So the first deal negotiation is happening on that, and then followed by that, there are certain rules and regulations for which were given by the government of India to declare any community, any patch of forest as a CCA. So that is the legal process which we will be following once we get at least 95% yes from the community.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think, you know, just like scientists around the world aren't all the same, we can never assume that communities are just, you know, one group. And so working through those dynamics is difficult, but important, I think, not just for conservation, but to be ethical and respectful in the way that's done. Well, that's really inspiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Excellent.
Thank
All right.
you.
Well, with that, we'll go on to our next talk by Ewan Macdonald, who is a Caddis Senior Research Fellow in Conservation Geopolitics at Worcester College, University of Oxford. He has wide-ranging interdisciplinary interests in conservation spanning spatial ecology, behavior change, and conservation ethics. And today's talk will focus on which areas we should prioritize for conservation as seen through the lens of clouded leopards on Borneo. Welcome, Ewan.
So can you see see my slides?
Absolutely perfect, yeah.
Thanks, Axel. Great. Thank you for having me here. Today, I'd like to very briefly take you through two thought experiments in protected area design. We're not going to have time to dive into the methodological details today, but all of the papers that I'll mention are going to be clearly signposted, and I'd be very happy to discuss any of them further if anyone wants to get in touch afterwards. But for now, I'm just going to focus on a very top-level overview. There we go, sorry. We all know that habitat loss drives species decline, not only by reducing overall habitat area, but also by fragmenting landscapes and disrupting connectivity and gene flow. Motivated by this concern, we simulated the impact of rapid forest loss on population size and genetic diversity for the Sunda-clouded leopard on Borneo. We found that across all measures, our simulated clouded leopards declined substantially between the years 2000 and 2010. However, those declines accelerated between 2010 and 2020. For example, you can see here that the number of clouded leopards that the landscape is expected to be able to support fell by 13% in the first timestamp, and then by almost another 60% as we moved towards 2020. Importantly, when we conducted this analysis, 2020 was still in the future. So the landscape models for the year 2000 and 2010 were based on empirically derived satellite data. However, the 2020 model was generated by creating a deforestation risk map for Borneo and then applying it to the 2010 landscape to produce a predicted land use map for 2020. This gave us the opportunity to run a series of simulation experiments in which we tested different approaches to protected area design, combining multiple counterfactual scenarios with the deforestation risk model and applying them to the 2010 landscape and then evaluating their impacts. Importantly, these are not intended as realistic forecasts or as policy prescriptions. Rather, they allow us to explore theoretical questions about reserve design in a highly realistic simulated environment. The first set of questions that we explored, published in this paper about a year ago, asked whether the existing protected area network is sufficient to conserve clouded leopards. And if not, what can we do to maximize its effectiveness? The basic premise is that protected areas are a critical tool for halting land use change. However, there are well-documented concerns that much of the world's protected area estate is located in remote, isolated regions far from the most immediate pressures. We understand the practical constraints here. These areas are often cheaper and less controversial to protect. But if protected areas are to influence land use outcomes, then they need to be located where the threat level is highest. We developed 6 counterfactual scenarios to explore this issue. 2 examined the effectiveness of the existing protected area network. 2 examined the impact of low-cost, expedient protected areas. And 2 examined a proactive paradigm that located protected areas in the regions with the highest deforestation risk. We combined each scenario with the deforestation risk there and then compared the resultant population size and the genetic diversity to the 2010 baseline. First, when we compare the existing protected area network to the 2010 baseline, we see dramatic declines across all measures, including a predicted 50% drop in population size shown in the middle of the top row here. Next, when we compare low-cost approaches to those that focus efforts on the highest risk areas, we find that following an expedient conservation paradigm has minimal benefits for clouded leopards above and beyond the existing protected area network. While the proactive approaches do perform slightly better, the only one that makes a substantive difference is the scenario that imagines us ripping up the existing protected area network and reallocating that area to the regions of highest risk. At this point, it's important to reiterate that this is just a theoretical thought experiment. The scenarios represent logical extremes designed to illustrate a point. They're not realistic policy recommendations. Even so, the message is clear. The existing protected area network on Borneo is inadequate, we think, for conserving clouded leopards. Second, expedient reserve design is far less effective than proactively targeting high-risk areas. This might strike you as being obvious, and actually I'd agree, but the added contribution here is that we can quantify that difference. And then finally, even under the most optimistic assumptions of 100% effectiveness and no leakage, expedient approaches deliver almost no improvement over a business as usual setting. Our second thought experiment, published a few months ago, was to explore the relative efficacy of core areas and corridors in protected area design. This is a debate that began back in the 1970s, and since then a large literature has emerged mostly focused on identifying potential corridors. These studies generally assume that connectivity is important, but very few empirical studies have directly tested that assumption. Others have argued that habitat area is more important than habitat configuration. To date, no one has explored this question in the context of realistic counterfactual conservation scenarios. To address this question, we identified the most important core areas for clouded leopards on Borneo, along with the key corridors that connect them. Again, these were based on the 2010 landscape surveys from our first study. As before, we generated a set of counterfactual scenarios, this time representing all plausible combinations of core areas and the corridors that connect them. We then simulated the births, marriages, and deaths for 100 generations of clouded leopards under each scenario and evaluated the outcomes in terms of population size and genetic diversity. We developed a set of hypotheses to test the relative importance of core areas versus corridors. Each hypothesis generates a set of predictions about how different combinations of scenarios should compare with each other. For example, Hypothesis 1 predicts that the full network will perform better than all other scenarios, while Hypothesis 6 is a little bit more complex, involving 20 pairwise comparisons between scenarios that protect the same core areas, but with or without corridors. For example, predicting that Scenario 1 will be better than Scenario 22, and that Scenario 2 will be better than Scenario 25, and so on and so forth. Because we're interested in the role of landscape configuration independent of habitat area, we test these hypotheses using both raw and area-weighted measures of population size and genetic diversity. Here you can see why controlling for area is important. These 5 underperforming scenarios are also the scenarios that protect the smallest amount of land. but the question of how efficient they are at delivering conservation per unit area is a little bit less obvious. This table shows the proportion of comparisons that were statistically significant for each hypothesis. We don't have time to go through each hypothesis in detail, but I want to draw your attention to hypotheses 3 and 5. Hypothesis 3 focuses on the largest patch of core habitat, while hypothesis 5 focuses on the total network area. Both were strongly supported, even after controlling for area. This indicates that overall habitat extent and large intact patches are disproportionately important for conservation outcomes. Turning to the question of connectivity, hypothesis 6 investigates whether corridors enhance conservation outcomes. And interestingly, here we only find modest support. A few predictions were significant when we consider the raw response variables, but critically, this effect largely disappears once we control for area. In other words, the apparent benefit of corridors comes mostly from the extra habitat that they add to the protected area network and not from any connectivity that they might or might not provide. So, what matters more? What matters more, habitat area or landscape configuration and connectivity? In this system, the answer is clear. Habitat area is the primary driver of conservation outcomes, with individual large patches also proving critically important. Interestingly, we find a non-linear relationship between area and conservation outcomes, such that larger protected areas deliver disproportionately greater gains in population size and genetic diversity, even after you account for their greater extent. Compared to that, we find that connectivity plays a secondary role, offering little benefit beyond the added habitat area it provides. We therefore recommend that where possible, conservation efforts should prioritize protection, consolidation, and expansion of core habitat areas as a priority over maintaining the connectivity between them. Okay, so I've talked about two theoretical thought experiments. So how do we pull the lessons of those two studies together? The first thing to say is that while the simulation experiments presented here were parameterized around clouded leopards in Borneo, there's good reason to think that the broad conclusions are more generalizable to other species and locations, to other small cats and beyond. Across both thought experiments, again, the messages were clear. The first protected areas only work if they're placed where the threat is greatest. And second, when it comes to design, habitat area dominates configuration. Larger, intact areas deliver disproportionate conservation gains. Connectivity is not irrelevant, but in this system, the benefits are largely explained by the additional habitat it brings. So, if conservation resources are limited, and of course they always are, the most impactful strategy is obvious. Protect, consolidate, and expand core habitat in high-risk areas. Area first and configuration second. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Yeah, taking me back to my undergraduate days as well with single large or several small. Thank you for that. And actually giving an analysis here that's, empirical, applicable, and inconvenient, maybe in some aspects. The one inconvenient truth, once again, is but it makes sense after you discover it, is to focus on areas of highest threat. But often we hear, of course, that connectivity and corridors are the answer to everything, or many things. How much of the result do you think depends on the ecology of this species versus other species? Is there anything in particular in terms of, for instance, how they deal with edge versus core, and how might that compare maybe to other specialized or more generalist felids?
That's actually a perfect question, Axel, because there was an element of the study that I didn't have time to go into, and you tee that up perfectly. So the models are parameterized on habitat suitability for crowded leopards. So we're essentially focusing on forest-dependent species in this context, species like leopard cats or whatever, that are more happy in palm oil is maybe a little bit less relevant to here. But the primary ecological difference that comes forward from our analysis is, in addition to comparing all those different scenarios, we also reran all of those different simulations at a range of different dispersal distances. And when we look at the impact of dispersal distance on the effectiveness of connectivity, the corridors begin to become effective the greater the dispersal distance of the simulated crowded leopard, because we don't really know what their dispersal distance is. But that tells us that for species that with greater dispersal abilities, they're more likely to be able to take advantage of corridors than species with small dispersal distances. The slight problem and caveat to that in this study is that the dispersal distances we modeled ranged from implausibly small to implausibly large, containing the plausible number somewhere in the middle. And really, the corridors were only becoming effective at what I would say were implausibly large dispersal distances for crowded leopards. But either way, in this setting and within this context, a big predictor there of the effectiveness of corridors is the dispersal distance or dispersal ability of the species you're most interested in.
Very, very interesting. So corridor is useful if you know how to use it. Basically, if you have the ecology and the natural history to be able to traverse it.
I guess you could put it the other way and say that if you've got a species that doesn't disperse far, the corridors the corridor's got to be pretty small.
Exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we have a question from Rue Campbell. Rue, please go ahead.
Hi, Ewan. That was an interesting talk. Thank you very much. There's a lot in there. I don't think I quite understood the second half fully, so I'll have to look at it more closely later and read the paper you're doing. But I was wondering, that first thought experiment you did, you looked at the counterfactuals like proactive and expedient protection, and I was wondering, you maybe have done this already. I think it'd be very interesting to do, is to try and model the human response to it, because of course, as soon as you protect something, then the response of the pressures might change in a way. So you've got a market, say for a product like palm oil or whatever, and you say, well, you can't put your plantation here, so you can't deforest here, and they go, well, I still can make money from this, so I'm going to instead put it somewhere else. And so that shifts the threat area somewhere else in a way, and then your proactive protection strategy is not actually leading to more protection in the end. So you're you're shifting, you're working in a kind of dynamic system, actually. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, so we absolutely haven't done that, but it would be really interesting to do. One constraint on that is the computational power of running some of these analyses. They were quite intensive and required quite a lot of computer time. So creating a dynamic model where deforestation happens iteratively, and then you look at how that piece of deforestation in one time step then ricochets on to more land use next time and so forth, would exponentially increase the computational power needed to do the analysis. Not impossible, and certainly interesting, but we haven't done it. And then the other thing to say is, in that study, we make certain assumptions about what could be considered land values or the opportunity cost of any given patch of land. And at the moment, that is essentially based on deforestation risk, but building in a more accurate model of the economic land values into that sort of dynamic model, again, would dramatically increase the computational power needed, but would, I think, be very interesting in trying to understand how these patterns shift through time.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
Very interesting to do. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ewan. Amazing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Lot of food for thought there, I think. That's terrific. All right. Excellent. And with that, we have the pleasure of having Tabea. Many of you know Tabea Lanz, who's been so instrumental. She's a wildlife biologist working as a Red List coordinator for the IUCN SSC Cat Specialist Group. And welcome, Tabea.
Yes, now you can see it. Great. Okay, I'm going to talk about the small cat report, specifically on the IUCN Red List assessment changes and challenges for small cat species. This report has been created by the IUCN SSC Cat Specialist Group in 2024. So the Cat Specialist Group has several responsibilities, and one of the main responsibilities is assessing the conservation status of all cat species at the global level. And this also includes the 33 non-Panthera species, which need to be reassessed at least every 10 years for the IUCN Red List, but also for the IUCN Green Status of Species, and quite newly coming the climate change vulnerability assessments that we are just starting. The Cat Specialist Group works with the strategic conservation cycle that you see here with these 8 steps, which is mainly based on the Assess, Plan, Act conservation cycle of the IUCN SSC that probably a lot of you already know, with the 2 components, additionally networking and communicate. So as you can see, this is really an adaptive process, which is important to highlight. And the Red List assessment and the green status of species make an important key part of the second step, review status. So to know what is the status at the moment, where do we start when we want to do conservation actions for a species? Generally, we can say that there is no sensible planning without a robust assessment, so without knowing the status quo of a species at the moment. There is no successful action without careful planning, so that's also key. And there is no implementation without serious monitoring and evaluation. And I also like to highlight important is also to learn and share not only the results, but also the lessons learned to can then improve all the other steps when you go back after you have finished a project or a strategy. So the IUCN Red List assessment is a standardized measure of extinction risk. So in fact, it asks what is the likelihood of a species becoming extinct in the near future, given the current knowledge about population trends, range, and recent current or projected threats. What I like to highlight is the Red List is not a list of species that are priorities for conservation action. So also species which have not been assessed for the IUCN Red List are of high priority for conservation action. So it's not only species which need conservation actions which are on this list, also species which are not on the list are of high need. And I like to highlight a second point that extinction risk, so the Red List assessment, is one important factor that you need to consider when you set priorities in conservation action, but it's not the only one. You should also consider other factors. These can be financial ones, the cultural ones, biological or social ones, also the recovery potential of a species. So all these factors should be considered when you set priorities in conservation for a species. Just really quickly, I will not go into detail. We have 5 IUCN Red List criteria that you see here on the left, which look at slightly different sites of a species, so like population, size reduction, or the geographical range, decline and the population size, very small or restricted population, or also look at quantitative analysis. And these criteria are used to define then, based on quantitative thresholds, into which category of the IUCN a species falls into it. And we have these 3 threatened categories: vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. And for them, we have these quantitative thresholds. Depending on the criteria on which you can list a species, you are allowed to use more or less data uncertainty. So, for example, on the criterion A, you can use more uncertainty and more assumptions than you can on the criterion C, which is important to know. So for criterion C, you need quite good data and information to apply this criterion. For criterion A, you are allowed to include more assumptions. Just really quickly, the IUCN Green Status of Species, which is a standardized measure of species recovery, is quite a new tool, not that new anymore, but it's really complementing the outputs of the Red List assessment, which looks at extinction risk, because this one looks also at the potential of species recovery on the mid, but also on the long term. And additionally, it assesses the impact of and incentivizes conservation actions. So it's really useful to use the IUCN Red List and the Green Status of Species together, because it gives you a more complete picture of the overall situation of a species. So now let's have a look at the small cat report. We had several goals with this report. First of all, to guide and streamline the Red List assessments of small cat species, to inform on knowledge gaps, to help prioritize future conservation action and research, and to facilitate cooperation for information exchange on small cat species. The methods we used, so first of all, we reviewed the conservation assessments of the 27 non-Panthera cat species. We have left out, for example, the lynx species. That's why we don't have this 33. We also looked at the knowledge base, including distribution information. So what is available if we look for new information? What is the basis? And we evaluated the robustness, consistency, and the evidentiary basis of the Red List assessments of the small cats. The key results we found is that there is substantial variation in the knowledge between the small cat species. So for few ones, we have some information at the global level, but for many, we just have information, for example, a density estimate for few areas across its range, but not at the global level. More challenging is also to have population size estimates for many cats, small cats at the global level. So we identified several major information gaps for many species, like population size estimates, abundance, density estimates, population trends, but also in regard to habitat use or threats and their impacts on the species. Further on, Red List assessments of small cats often rely, therefore, on expert knowledge and assumptions, because we are just lacking the information at the global level. We have to make assumptions and rely on the knowledge of experts for the assessments. There are also some inconsistency between the Red List assessment of small cats and in application of the IUCN Red List guidelines. Here, I like to highlight that the guidelines have been created to be applicable for a lot of different taxa. So from birds to trees to insects to mammals. So they leave always some space for interpretation. And that can be why we have different applications also within a taxon. So overall, we can say that these points show a limitation in regard to the reliability and comparability of past red list assessments for small cats. Further on, we identified some challenges. So one is the scale mismatch between global and regional and national conservation needs. For example, a species can be least concerned at a global level, but critically endangered at regional or national level. So that needs to be taken into account, especially when allocating funding or resources. It can also be the other way around, that at the global level, it's endangered, for example, but at the national or regional level, it can be least concerned, so doing really well. So it's important to make this differentiation between the global status and regional or national status. As I mentioned before, there is some inconsistency in application of the assessment guidelines due to this space of interpretation. Data uncertainty is also a challenge. For a lot of small cats, we have a lot of data uncertainty, and it needs to be included in the assessment. So it's always good to include these uncertainties and all assumptions which are made in an assessment. Misinterpretation of categories influencing funding allocation. So here I'd just like to mention that also a globally assessed least concerned species is of high conservation needs, regionally or nationally. So as mentioned before, other factors beside the extinction risk assessment should be considered always when allocating funding. And that's connected with the last point here, the conservation success paradox. So downlisting a species on the IUCN Red List may trigger reduced attention despite ongoing conservation dependence. So it's always also important to check when a species is downlisted if it is conservation dependent. So a lot of species depend on continuing conservation to be kept in this lower threat category. And if you then take away all the support, it can be that it gets quickly into a higher threatened category again. So conclusions and recommendations we have drawn from this report is that the Red List of threatened species still remains one of the most influential tools for conservation because it informs policy, legislation, and international conventions. Information and outcomes from the assessments directly inform and direct conservation planning and actions. So it's also important for the planning part, and the planning is important for the action. The Red List assessments should be streamlined with enhanced consistency within and between species, so to make sure that the guidelines are interpreted the same way within a taxon. Further on, the implementation and awareness of the IUCN green status of species should be increased because it really can add a lot of important information to the IUCN Red List. So both tools together can be really powerful. There is a need for stronger integration between assessment processes and conservation planning because that's critically for effective small cat conservation. So to link really the assessments with the planning and then further on with the action. Improvement should also be made in the sharing of data and lessons learned. The more we share with each other also what worked and what did not work, the more we can also improve all our conservation actions. Further on, there is a need to strengthen species-specific networks and working groups. And where needed, also to develop range-wide conservation strategies and actions plans. Another important point is also maintaining the long-term support for conservation-dependent species, ensuring adequate funding and capacity. That's what I mentioned before, that for some species, even if we can downlist it, they still need continuing conservation actions. And in this part, for example, the green status of species can give a lot of indications how dependent or a species is on conservation, continuing conservation at mid or long term. And last but not least, there is a need to prioritize targeted research on conservation planning also for small cat species to also fill these knowledge gaps for a lot of species. Yes, so I thank you very much for your attention and also for the invitation to speak at this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tabea. I mean, I think it goes without saying you help form the backbone in many ways of small cat conservation, both in terms of the red list, but also in terms of green status and looking at that conservation dependency. So thank you so much for that. And it's very interesting as well to hear you talk about the different criteria and, you know, how tolerant they might be of uncertainty. On the one hand, there can be studies in the world, and we've heard several, where, you know, they're long-term, they're very intensive, very good in terms of estimating density or trends. In terms of the type of information you're looking for, is it worthwhile, for instance, if someone has a single record detection of a species in some new place?
Yes, that's always very valuable to have these records because it really helps to inform any assessment. So the more information we get, the better get the assessments. And I think that's a key point to share as much as possible this information that they can be really informed by good science. Yes, so distribution information we lack, unfortunately, still for a lot of small cats. So in several places. So we are always really interested, and with this you would help a lot to enhance these assessments.
That's great. By the way, I see a couple of comments popping up in the chat saying how patient you are with everyone. So thank you again for your support around the world. One of the things that's of interest to me as well is when you talk about data uncertainty, you know, and lack of information, at what point would you consider a species to be data deficient?
Well, according to the IUCN Red List unit, they would never consider a small cat as data deficient. That really would just be the case if you almost know anything. So you would not know if it's least concern or even critically endangered. If you just don't know if it's endangered or vulnerable, it would not be considered data deficient. So it's really just in the cases where you are not sure if it's least concern or even critically endangered, it would be considered data deficient, yes.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. And I'm sure many will have your contact information. Others will reach out, I think, for advice and guidance. And at the same time, you're collaborating with everyone around the world, which is really admirable and so helpful. So thank you so much, Tabea, for joining us and sharing this incredible work of the Cat Specialist Group.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we actually move on to a 5-minute break again, before then returning for the rest of the day as we go from our last talks of the day into our panel with funders. All right. See you shortly. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a very good but short break, but you're all warmed up now for our continuation. In fact, we're very pleased to have Mauro with us. Mauro Lucherini has worked on neotropical carnivores for over 35 years. And he is focusing now on conservation biology and mitigation of conflicts with humans. He's one of the founders of the Andean Cat Alliance, where he's currently leading local community participation initiatives. Thank you, Mauro, for joining us.
The Andean cat is a small cat, characterized by this long bushy tail that you can see here. It occurs in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Peru, primarily in high-altitude regions of the Andes. Listed as endangered by IUCN, the Andean cat is the most threatened felid in the Americas. While not yet published, the IUCN green status of species assessed it as largely depleted, reflecting its small population size and ongoing declines. the species traits that limit rapid population growth, including low reproductive rate, a strict association with habitats, such as this one, very rocky and broken, and extremely low population densities. Because of that, past conservation actions appear to have slowed population declines, but have not led to substantial recovery. Nevertheless, conservation offers potential for long-term recovery, and conservation efforts remain essential to prevent further declines and reduce extinction risk. The threats to this cat's survival include habitat loss, currently due to mining and oil extraction, persecution by local communities due to perceived livestock predation, vehicle collisions in areas with increasing road networks, predation by domestic dogs, usually associated to livestock breeders, and irresponsible pet ownership, which creates the conditions for potential disease transmission and competition. The Andean Cat Alliance is the only organization fully dedicated to the conservation of the species across its entire distribution, and it does it through research based on camera trapping and non-invasive DNA sampling to better understand the species distribution and population status, and thus guide conservation planning, but also through conservation actions. We are working with local communities to increase their engagement in conservation, raising awareness about the importance of the Andean cat conservation, both locally and globally, and thus transforming the Andean cat into a flagship species. We are promoting tools for non-lethal mitigation of livestock predation and to reduce retaliatory killing, installing road signs to decrease vehicle collisions, and neutering and vaccinating domestic animals to limit disease transmission. Thank you very much.
Well, that's terrific. And Mauro, you're still here, right?
Yes.
Yes, great. Yes, wonderful. Well, you know, this shows the value of being so well prepared as you are with your video, which went across perfectly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Oh, not at all. No. Technology, there's always a ghost in the machine, you know. That happens to everyone, certainly to me anyway. So, yeah, I mean, just amazing. In terms of the community-based initiatives, you know, that you're helping to lead, why does this species matter to local communities?
Well, that's a tricky question because in terms of their traditional ancestral culture, the Andean cat did matter a lot. It was really an important part of their cosmovision. Unfortunately, most of these ancient traditions have been lost. The situation changes between country and country, between region and region, but they have been largely lost. And so one of the things that we are trying to do is to rediscover them, to revitalize them, and to do it with the communities themselves. And then additionally, we are trying to create new value. So the new value is associated to an economic income that we are trying to generate with the community using their traditional handcrafts ability. And so they create these beautiful handcrafts and we help them to sell them, to commercialize them. And so we are creating new values and new connections between this cat and their day-to-day life.
Yeah, amazing. Well, that's amazing to take that trajectory through time and adapt and be realistic. And there's a question actually from Jonas, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and asking Mauro your question.
Yes, Jonas is asking me if I can share more information about the green status assessment.
That's
So
right. Jonas, sorry, Jonas, did you have anything to add to that? Did you want to say it?
Hello. There's a lot of background noise here. I'm at a coffee bar in Brussels. But Mauro, you have seen the question. So I just want to thank you for all your work and to ask about this green status assessment, if you could share a bit more about this. Thank you.
Yes, Tabea just explained us a little bit what the green status is and what are its objectives. And I think that in our experience with the Andean cat has helped us a lot to understand the importance of our work, that even if we don't see improvement in the population, that we would have seen probably a much worse situation now if we were not there, and if other kinds of conservation actions that do not depend directly on the Andean Cat Alliance work were there. And it also helped us to look into the future and to see that, yeah, again, that our work is important and we need to maintain it, to keep on with all our conservation actions, because they do matter, and because if we are able to expand them with additional support, we can also probably improve the situation. So it's a very detailed analysis of what your conservation actions have meant and will potentially mean in the future for the species.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, excellent question. Even though I'm happy here, I'm slightly envious of you being in a coffee bar in Brussels. Beautiful place to be. But thank you so much, Mauro. And I think in terms of green status, one of the things that's, I think, engaging as well is with governments, with funders, with others, is to talk about recovery potential instead of just risk of extinction. It's a different kind of conversation, I think. We'll have to move on here, but thank you, Mauro, for being patient with us and for your excellent explanations. Yes, thank you. All right, and then we go on to a presentation, a recorded presentation from Ganesh Puri, who's a forest officer from Nepal and the founder of the Western Terai Fishing Cat Conservation Project. His work focuses on fishing cat conservation and community-led approaches to mitigating fish farmer fishing cat conflict in South Asia. And Ganesh won't be available for questions, but we look forward to his recording here.
Hello and namaste. I'm Ganesh Puri from Nepal. Today I'm going to present how fishing cat and fish farmer conflict going to be transferred into conservation. So what is the threat on fishing cat in our working area? So let's go with the short story. And this is the consequences. Actually, fishing cat is killed by fish farmers due to the fishing cat steal the fish from their fish pond, and retaliatory killing is one of the major threats for fishing cat in our working area. And this is the story from the Nepal, western part of the Terai landscape in Kapilvastu. For the fishing cat conservation, there are two kinds of community involved for fishing cat threats. One is fish farmers community. I already showed the threats about the fishing cat from these communities. Retaliatory killing is the major threats from this group. And another one is the fisherman communities, who are the indigenous people of Nepal who do fishing activities in the wetland and natural lakes for their livelihood, and overfishing in the lake and river, and also sometimes retaliatory killing is also the major threat for fishing cat conservation. So how are we fostering coexistence on this regards? The major program for the fish farming communities is a fish bank program. And for the fishermen communities, we applied alternative livelihood programs, handicraft making programs, and also we prepare the future generation for fishing cat conservation. So fish bank program is designed for the fish farming communities where fishing cat is killed due to the retaliation, and this fish bank compensate fish farmers what they lost from the fishing cat. And from these initiatives, fish farmers are positive toward fishing cat, and they are the guardians for the fishing cat conservation also. For the fishermen communities, what we apply? Actually, we empower the indigenous people who are the Tharu people, and we encourage them to create a handicraft, and we also support them to develop the product and also the market access, and they sell their handicraft product into the market, and from that profit they allocated 5% of the profit to the conservation fund, and we match the same amount, and the fund is going to be used for the conflict mitigation in their own village. You can see the example when some of their village member lost the goat from the cat, and they instantly compensate the new goat to the family member, and also they support the predator proof chicken coop to their village member from that conservation fund. And we also do the youth engagement program. We prepare the future generation for the fishing cat conservation. These generations are from the fisherman communities and fish farmer communities, and we capacitate them and we familiarize them to the fishing cat conservation. Now you can see some of the footage of fishing cat in the fish pond and in our working area. And thank you.
Oh, it's wonderful work done by Ganesh with the communities again, especially, working with the Tharu women in terms of handicrafts, and the funds actually go into a community fund to help, again, the activities in the community, that reinvestment. I think a wonderful model. Thank you so much for that. All right, and now we have the pleasure of having Sujay Singh join us with, I think, one of my favorite bio statements coming up. He is currently a wildlife habitat biologist with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, and will be presenting about his master's research from Washington State University. He finds small cats fascinating because they are a slightly enlarged version of house cats, which he finds equally fascinating because he is never going to understand what goes through their little kitty heads at any second. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to get started by just talking about the general ecology of these two cats. So Canada lynx, or lynx as I'm going to refer to from here on out, are a cold-adapted specialist wildcat, whereas bobcats are a warm-adapted generalist wildcat. Now, as you might expect, because of these different species designations, climate change has different impacts on these two cats, with increasing temperatures predicted to negatively impact lynx and positively impact bobcats. Now, lynx are listed as threatened in the United States under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and endangered in the state of Washington, which is where my research was focused. And in contrast to lynx, bobcats are doing just fine within Washington and more broadly within the United States as well. But despite this general knowledge of climate change having different impacts on these two cats, there's still a lack of information regarding the density of the two cats within regions of overlap. And this is where my research comes in, where I attempted to use trail cameras in combination with spatially explicit capture-recapture models in order to estimate density of both lynx and bobcats within the region of overlap. So this region of overlap was located in north central Washington in the United States, and it was a super unique study area because it's one of the few regions within the United States that has reproducing populations of both lynx and bobcats. Additionally, it's also really unique because it has a really pronounced elevation gradient. So it really allows us to study the abiotic and biotic factors that are really driving the density responses for these two cats. So in order to estimate density, I had to identify individuals, which I did so via pelt markings on the inner front legs of both species. And as you might expect, this process was incredibly challenging. So I made it a little bit easier for myself by naming my lynx and bobcats after avatar characters. So that's about as detailed as I'm going to get today regarding my methods, and I'm going to get straight into results. And for lynx, I found that maximum temperature modeled as a quadratic covariate was the best predictor of density. with lynx density peaking at around 18 degrees Celsius and existing at an average density of 1.58 lynx per 100 square kilometers. Now, just like with lynx, maximum temperature modeled as a quadratic covariate was the best predictor for bobcat density. But in contrast to lynx, bobcat density peaked at around 21 degrees Celsius, and they existed at an average density of 2.93 bobcats per 100 square kilometers. Now, I do want to end today by talking about some general takeaways, with the first one being that increasing temperatures are likely to affect the population dynamics of these two cats differently across the range edge, with increasing temperatures likely to drive lynx density decreases, but keep bobcat densities either stable or increasing going into the future. Now, naturally, this is painting a pretty negative picture for lynx conservation, which is unfortunately often the case. But I do want to end today by saying that there is hope for this wildcat, with the first sign being that fires, while often initially detrimental, were actually found to be incredibly beneficial for lynx, at least in my study area. In fact, lynx existed at some of their highest densities within a region that was burned from a massive wildfire back in 2006, which lynx are just now starting to recolonize. And then finally, despite a lot of the threats facing lynx, they're still producing kittens both within my study area and other regions in Washington, which I just think is this incredible ray of hope and hopefully spurs additional conservation of this iconic wildcat species. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening, and I'll take any questions.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's that's an interesting picture where on the one hand you say, you know, the temperature dependence could be poor for lynx, but I think you're saying if it causes fires, maybe that's a good thing, if I'm understanding that right. And so that's one of these counterintuitive conclusions. What is it about the burnt areas that's so good for them? I mean, is there an association with certain prey species, or yeah?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. I think those burnt areas are just now starting to get enough dense stands of lodgepole pine and some other tree species that are really facilitating snowshoe hares, which are, you know, the primary prey for lynx. And I think I didn't really estimate snowshoe hare density, but it appears that snowshoe hares are just existing at a super high density in those burnt areas, which is really helping lynx come back.
And do bobcats move into those burn areas as well?
Not yet. So at that specific site and most other sites where I had cameras in that burned areas, I did not detect bobcats, but honestly, I think that's mostly because those were just really high elevation that bobcats tended to stay away from to begin with. But, you know, as snowpack continues to decrease going forward, that might facilitate bobcats going up there in the future. It's really hard to tell right now. But at least for now, bobcats were not going in those high elevation burned areas.
It's interesting the high elevations are burning as well.
Yeah, it poses a problem too, because you can't really control the burns when they're that remote and high elevation.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Thank you so much for these insights. Again, right on the cusp of an international border. I suppose I'm on the other side of that border. But yeah, thank you so much. Terrific. All right. And with that now, we will next have Catalina Sánchez-Lalinde, who's a biologist from the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, Bogota, with a master's degree in applied zoology and long-standing experience working with felids. She's a member of the Tiger Cats Conservation Initiative with a research focus on the ecology and conservation of small wildcats, including the clouded tiger cat in Colombia. And we have a recording. I don't believe that we have Catalina online, but we'll proceed with the recording.
The clouded tiger cat, Leopardus pardinoides, is one of the least studied small cats in the Andean region. Restricted to high elevation ecosystems and currently classified as vulnerable, it faces increasing pressures across its range. In the eastern Colombian Andes, baseline information on its population status and threats has been extremely limited. Our work took place in and around Chingaza National Natural Park, located in the eastern Andes of Colombia. This area forms part of an important high-elevation conservation corridor. Despite its ecological value, the surrounding landscape is increasingly affected by habitat fragmentation, hunting, and the presence of domestic dogs. Between 2021 and 2023, we implement an integrated conservation strategy combining wildlife monitoring, disease prevention, and community engagement. We conduct 6 vaccination campaigns in surrounding communities, vaccinating 120 dogs and assessing the health of 104 individuals to reduce the risk of disease transmission to wild cats. At the same time, we carry out environmental education activities and deploy 33 camera traps inside the park and the buffer areas. We record 3 wild felid species, the clouded tiger cat, the ocelot, and the puma. Our analysis revealed that human-related variables, particularly hunting and dog presence, had a stronger influence on felid abundance than prey availability. Notably, clouded tiger cats show higher relative abundance in buffer zones than inside Chingaza National Natural Park. Through camera trap monitoring, we did not detect visible signs of disease in wild felids during the study period. However, no direct diagnostic testing has been conducted on wild cats in this region, mainly due to logistical and financial constraints. Disease risk remains significant. In a nearby buffer area without vaccination campaigns, environmental authorities confirm a case of canine distemper in an Andean bear. Additionally, rabies has been recorded in a western mountain quad in the region. These findings reinforce the importance of proactive disease prevention strategies. Colombia holds a major responsibility for the conservation of the clouded tiger cat, as a significant portion of the species distribution occurs within its territory. Even in the absence of confirmed disease cases, proactive prevention is essential. Our findings show that human pressures, particularly hunting and unmanaged dogs, are shaping the conditions under which this species persist. The long-term survival of the clouded tiger cat will depend on integrated conservation strategies that extend beyond protected areas and actively involve local communities. We also like to acknowledge the support of our partners, institutions, and local communities who made this work possible.
Well, very interesting, and I don't believe we have Carolina in person, but what great work again, and isn't that a take-home message that the human impact is more important than the prey? So you can have prey, but the human impacts, on the one hand, are what we need to worry about. The good thing is that allows us an opportunity for engagement as well. So really wonderful. Well, with that, we actually have the conclusion of our talks for the day, and we're going to go into our panel. And it's a real pleasure for me to be able to welcome some real leaders from around the world in terms of talking about what funders look for, a question that I'm sure many of you will have. Overall, it's one of the fundamental things, and this is an opportunity for all of you. We have a discussion lined up here. Well, it's not scripted, but we can talk amongst ourselves. But at the same time, this is your opportunity to ask funders what they want. And so I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and prioritize any questions that you have. First of all, it's my pleasure though to introduce our panel. I think they're just sort of coming on screen here. It's once again, it's such a privilege and one of the marvels of technology that we have voices, from New York, from London, and special thanks to Nicholas for joining us from Abu Dhabi, given current challenges in the region. I'll just start by introducing Joe Cook. Joe Cook's career started at the Zoological Society of London, where she gained over 20 years of experience in both ex situ and in situ conservation, with a particular focus on tigers and Amur leopards, coordinating several international breeding programs and acting as a manager of Amur region projects with the Wildcats Conservation Alliance. 5 years of teaching in further and higher education provided her with the opportunity to inspire the next generation of conservationists. Her current role as grants officer at the Rufford Foundation enables her to support and empower young people in the field, and she continues to champion innovative approaches to wildlife conservation and education. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much. Great to be here today.
Thank you. Ming encouraged me to give a shorter bio because you've already heard him introduced a couple times, also marvelously moderating yesterday. But in this context, Ming spearheads the Small Cat Action Fund for Panthera, and so we will be learning from him in terms of different approaches. Welcome, Ming.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Axel. And it's great to be on this panel. It's good to see you, Joe, as well as you, Nicholas. It's been a while, but I'm looking forward to some nice discussions.
And Nicholas Hurd is currently the Acting Director General of the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, which is a philanthropic organization established in Abu Dhabi in 2008 to support species conservation activities worldwide through small grants and conservation partnerships. He's been with the fund since it first began to accept grant applications in early 2009. Since 2010, he's also been a member of the Award Selection Committee of the Conservation Leadership Program. And Nicholas is also a member of the Reverse the Bread Accelerator Awards Advisory Board. Welcome, Nicholas.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Axel, and everyone at Panthera for having me and for putting together such a great event. It's been fascinating listening to all the amazing work being there, and it's a privilege to be allowed to join. Thank you.
Well, like you say, I mean, we're hearing from many inspiring leaders around the world, but inspired leaders need support, and you and your organizations here on screen are among those that are helping to support create future leaders. And we're talking about a certain group of species here, small cats. Of course, broader biodiversity is under threat, and some say that species conservation or funding species isn't worth it or isn't strategic. Does anybody want to take on that contentious topic?
I mean, I'm happy to comment if you like, briefly. I think I do believe that all species are massively important and that we have a responsibility to conserve species, big and small, prominent and less prominent, and all those that we interact with as part of our engagement with nature in a holistic sense. I think in terms of species conservation, the precautionary principle is very important. Nothing should be allowed to go extinct or indeed to become more threatened than it is. We have prioritization, of course, through initiatives such as the Red List, which I think are very valuable tools. But in terms of principles, I do believe that all species should be conserved and protected wherever possible. The interesting thing for me about cats, and sticking to small cats this evening, of course, is their role that they play within an ecosystem. And that, I think, is something that is obvious to everyone here in this conversation. But I think is also important. We see this in all applications that we receive and the grants that we give. The roles of those species that have oversized roles within an ecosystem, either as umbrella species or as indicator species, or indeed simply as species that one can really hook a conservation program onto. And that is also where cats and that intrinsic cuteness of cats, I think, can also play an important role beyond just their ecological value.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And just, Joe, as you've worked on different species of cats in the past, and just on the last point of Nicholas's, I mean, is it useful that these species are, iconic and beautiful, that the public can relate to them? Does that play in at all to what funders will want to support or
I'd like to say it shouldn't.
Right.
We shouldn't be biased. I mean, I'm saying this with a tiger and a leopard head on, but we all here love cats of all shapes and sizes. For the Rufford Foundation, there's absolutely no bias towards which projects we focus from a taxonomic point of view. However, I think when you're trying to engage more people in conservation, then yeah, it cannot be denied that the cute factor plays a huge part in it. And someone that's trying to raise funds for Partula snail, for example, will find it a lot more challenging than if you're trying to raise funds for the fishing cat or ocelot or whatever that might be. But I think it is that key role that they play within ecosystems. It's almost an entry point into perhaps doing a more expanded body of work. If you use that as your focal species to get started, it's then perhaps easier to bring in other themes or issues that are surrounding, what's happening. So I think it can help engage people, but funders shouldn't be swayed by their cuteness.
Yeah. Well, then, I mean, what does matter? I mean, Ming, I know that you're overwhelmed with applications, and so then, among all that, how does a funder pick out, those specific applications that really stand out? What is it that applicants can do to make their applications better, more fundable?
Yeah, no, excellent question. And to kind of follow up to some of the answers that Nicola and Joe mentioned, it's certainly really important to, when it comes to species, that's ultimately our currency, right? When it comes to conservation, we want to see all of those species, regardless of what they are, all increasing in their respective landscapes and sites. But it's especially important when we kind of have our species conservation that's clearly linked to kind of broader outcomes, right? So this can be, focused work that kind of demonstrates relevance to ecosystem. What is their role in the ecosystems? What is, how important is landscape connectivity? And also, more importantly, kind of the coexistence with people. And so these are some of the themes that, we kind of want to see in some of the more fundable applications, these connections to these broader outcomes, right? We want to be able to kind of lay those baselines, but have those baselines inform the threats that really kind of, really affect the survival of small cats. But, as with any kind of applications, we want to have clearly defined kind of conservation problems, and also, the methods that are appropriate to those kind of questions and at scale. Yeah, I think for us, really important, as any successful conservation project must have this local component. So yeah, we're kind of looking for those different objectives and components to have these funding proposals to be fundable and kind of in line with broader outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Ming. That's very helpful. And then for those that actually are successful in getting funding, and when there's options to continue funding over time, Nicholas, like what is the type of thing that you look for when you consider perpetuating funding again? I mean, one of the things that's tricky is reporting. Everything takes time. There's so many challenges for everyone who's working in the field, who's raising money, who's dealing with permits and technology, everything like that. But what should they concentrate on when they report back to you in terms of making it more likely to maybe get support again in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Axel. I think that's a very good point, good question. Reporting is obviously very important for a donor, but I think it's important also that donors are understanding and know that reporting is difficult, and know that we're providing funding for people to go and do the conservation work, not to sit in an office and write reports, although that is a crucial component. But really, I think what we're looking for is to see that, as far as is reasonable, someone has been able to sort of achieve the objectives that they had set out to do, that they were ultimately given the funding for, and that if they haven't been able to achieve those, that there's a bit of an explanation, even if it's entirely outside the control of the grant recipient or otherwise. Circumstances can change. We're dealing in a very fluid situation in very many cases. The wildlife does not, doesn't stick to its lane, as it were. Things change all the time, and I think as donors we have to recognise that. But I think what we're looking out for is that people are able to respond to those challenges that occur during the lifetime of the project, and are maybe able to make the best of those difficulties that might occur. In terms of repeat funding, I think what we're also looking for is a renewed project that builds on the previous work, that is not a repeat, but is a continuation or an expansion or an extension of previous work. and that can contribute further to the conservation of that particular species, or indeed to the career development of the grant recipient or his team, his or her team around them. And that, I think, is something that we're looking for. I think we try to be understanding. We try to know that there will be challenges, things will change, and we try to be proportionate as well. If we've given someone a very small grant, we don't expect a fabulous report with many papers and a huge PowerPoint. And I think that's important as well, to be proportionate. But also, ultimately, we are there to enable. And I think that's the thing with funders and donors, is they want to give money, they want to support, they want to help people who want to help species. And I think demonstrating that is one of the most important elements of any applicant, either first time or repeat applicant.
So if I may kind of just build onto that, because, you know, I think I agree with everything Nicholas said. You know, that's exactly what we're kind of looking for. You know, especially when it comes to reporting. Our grants aren't huge grants. You know, they're kind of in the realm of, you know, 5,000 to 10,000, and we're very well aware that a lot of our funders have many of these kind of funders, some small, some large, and the reporting can get a little bit tough to manage. Now, I'm not saying please do not submit your reports. Reports are always helpful, but we do have that understanding, particularly the types of people that we find, they're field biologists, they're in the field, they're on the front lines of conservation, collecting that data, working with the local communities. And so we know that they're busy with these activities and have kind of very little time to write reports. So, you know, yes, you know, our grant programs, our respective grant programs, we have these reporting requirements. But I just want to kind of put it out there that, you know, if there is a delay, send us an email. You know, we have some delays here. We're always happy to kind of accommodate that sort of stuff. In fact, I'm just dealing with a few of those now with the Small Cat Action Fund with delay reports. We're always understandable. You know, I think one of the benefits from the Small Cat Action Fund, kind of, you know, been led by myself, is that, you know, I have the field background myself. I've had that field training. I understand the constraints that people will face in the field, not with just the field work, but dealing with local communities, the stakeholders, the governments. Everyone else has their own priorities. And so it's always a challenge to kind of build that around. But when it comes to continued funding, you know, we really want to see that foresight, right? We're not just doing a survey here and there to get that baseline. You know, it's really important to have that foresight, that kind of 3 to 5 year strategy. And again, it may change. We understand that things change, but just showing us that there is this plan, right? How it progresses. And of course, there are going to be challenges. And as Nicholas put it perfectly, you know, we're also interested in what are the lessons learned, right? And that's something that's really important from the capacity building side. That's really important to us, that we want to kind of invest in these early career biologists and have these hurdles, right? Everyone needs these hurdles to overcome, and that's how you learn and that's how you improve. So yeah, that's one of the other kind of just reinforce what Nicholas was saying about continuing the funding.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think people are really reluctant to sort of get back in touch with funders if something has gone awry and it hasn't gone to plan. They're almost scared to let us know that, but why? You know, we are here to support you. And, you know, that thing about communication is really important. You want to build that relationship with your funder. So sending an email saying, look, this has happened, but this is what I'd like to do about it. Or is it okay if I reallocate my budget this way? Then that's brilliant. You know, it shows that you are adapting to whatever's happening, and we don't suddenly find out about it at the end of a project, seeing that something's really different and we've had no information about it. So, you know, it's almost a partnership. You know, we are here to support you. Please be open with us so that you get the best from it as well as us.
Yeah, and now we have a couple questions online here as well. So Olivia Feldman, why don't you come on and ask your excellent question?
Hi. Okay, you can't hear me. I realize it's a bit long. I'm sorry.
We have time.
So when it comes to possible collaboration between researchers, especially in a region where researchers may know each other, how much do funders prefer or not prefer to see that collaboration? This is kind of a two-part question. And then beyond that collaboration, if you have, say, multiple researchers working on the same project together, do funders prefer or not prefer to know that researcher X is applying to, say, the SCAF, and then researcher Y is applying to the Rufford, researcher Z is applying to Nat Geo? Does that count for or against? And then I have one final question. If a major organization might have a project in a certain part of a country, and this group of biologists may apply for these grants but isn't collaborating with that major organization, does that tend to count for or against? I realize it's a big, bulky question.
I think it's putting his hand up there.
Yeah, sorry, the question has disappeared from the Q&A. I was gonna reference that, but so yeah, I wanted to jump on that quickly because that was a great question by Olivia, and that was something that I also wanted to bring up with your question about continuing funding. Is yes, absolutely, we want to see that collaboration, right? Because our grant programs, again, we're 5,000 to 10,000. We're only a very small piece of that puzzle. It's a very important piece of that puzzle. But to have that kind of strategic longevity, it's important to have those local collaborators in place, whether it's the local community, another local NGO, local government. All of that is critical. Those critical pieces of the puzzle that come together to lead to an impactful and successful conservation projects. And again, that kind of relates to the third question, I guess, if it's attached onto a larger organization. Yeah, again, absolutely very helpful, at least from our perspective, because it shows there's at least some level of cost share between that project. This is the small part that you bring to the project with your grant and your expertise, but it's then bolted onto a much larger organization that will bring infrastructure, other expertise, and all this sort of stuff that helps augment your projects. So all of these things kind of leads towards conservation impacts by being resourceful and kind of leveraging on the small funding that you get from us to have something much larger. And then to the middle question, which I'll let Nicholas and Joe comment as well, is that there are projects that we co-fund. I think it kind of very depends on some of the scale and scope of those particular projects, but I'll give a chance for some others to jump in.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia, for that wonderful question. I fully agree with what Ming's saying, and don't really have much to add. Other than I would say, as regards this sort of another large NGO being in the same sort of landscape, in the same area, operating in the same area, I agree. I think that's a very good thing. There can be an awful lot of benefit from that. One thing I'd say is that what we tend to look out for is that we, again, with the small grants, we'd like to support local NGOs as well. And I think where there would be, if any, a tinge of concern there would just simply be that we would be very keen to see the continued independence of the smaller NGO. And so, yes, piggybacking, as it were, on support and infrastructure and so on, as Ming said, from the large NGO, but nonetheless being able to grow and evolve from into a larger entity itself over the course of time, hopefully, and so not being overwhelmed by a larger NGO. I think in the small grants space, a lot of the real benefit of the small grants work comes from supporting small local initiatives. And I think we would be a little bit hesitant to see those being swallowed up by anything too large, but at the same time benefiting from association and collaboration with larger NGOs. So it's a bit of a balance, I think, there.
Yeah.
But also in broad collaboration, I fully agree with Ming. I think we want to see a lot of that.
That's really insightful. And this is the kind of thing that, you can't find on a website. I mean, these kind of difficult issues. And I think it's wonderful that all of you are being so helpful and candid. There's two similar questions in the chat. I'm just going to ask Nicholas Galvez to come in and ask his question.
Hi, Nico Galvez here from Chile. Thank you very much. So we've heard a lot in the conference yesterday. We had a talk by the CEO regarding the use of the Red List, right, as a potential cutoff point for conservation of a particular species. So I recently did a Red List assessment and we used the most updated information, and we followed the guidelines, and it was downlisted. And so I received a bit of pushback regarding, hey, what's the impact on funding? So and so even though that in the assessment we see that the species is doing well generally, but there are still problems in some areas, and in the areas where the species is doing well, it's sort of like a safeguard for the future of the species. So it's not using the red list or not using the red list assessment talk that has been talked here. Is that also in line with the global donor funding prioritization schemes?
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in here because it's such a good question. And one thing that I worry about at times, and you're helping to lead on efforts, is that people are scared to apply the scientific information when it shows that a species is less in trouble. And there have been some past big conversations, for instance, in the downlisting of pandas or snow leopards, where there was huge contention, and I think in part because of this and because of the worry or the resistance against downlisting anything. There was a paper by Dave Mallon and others in Oryx, which was called "Downlisting is Not a Demotion." Joe, would you have a reflection on this?
Yeah, the red list is, really, really useful tool, and it's a great starting point for us. So if you are applying for a Rufford grant, for example, if it was taxonomic focused, then we do say if the species is listed as least concern on the red list, then we wouldn't necessarily consider it. However, there's always a caveat, because we totally appreciate that in some areas of the range, it's very much more highly threatened, and it's really important that it is conserved. So I think tomorrow you have a talk from Tyler, who we've recently given a grant to for Ocelot, a prime example where ordinarily we wouldn't consider an Ocelot programme, however, able to put forward that real strong conservation case as to why it needs to be protected in that area. And I just think for us, we have a huge number of applications coming through. We do have to have a fairly, broad, quick way of narrowing down the ones that we're going to take forward. But I would always say to applicants, if your particular species or subspecies is a special case, then just get that message across through your application, whether that's using a national red list, other sort of peer-reviewed papers, or even, the information you have, even if it's not published yet, just put forward that strong conservation case, and then we can consider it. So red list, not perfect, but a really good starting point for us.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just another question here from Cindy. It says from Peru. Cindy, would you mind coming on with your excellent question here as well?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes, yeah, sorry, I changed my computer. I was driving. Yeah, I want, like, based on your answers, like, you seem to have a clear definition or, a way to filter by species. But I was wondering in terms of local people, like, how do you filter by who's applying? So because we know that conservation takes a long time generally to get results. And sometimes you get application from like local people that may not be really great at writing proposals, but we know that they may stay in the landscape for like years, right? Like they may not go anywhere, right? Whereas if you have other people that are coming from the global north and have, like a lot of experience writing proposals, so they're probably going to be, like really good at that, but may be on the landscape for only for like a year or two. So how are we making sure, or you guys, that the right people get funded, thinking long term?
Ming, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Cindy, it's good to hear from you. So good question. And the thing is, to have a completely kind of candid answer for you is that I personally don't take too much attention to how am I going to say this? How well a proposal is written, right? I mean, there are ways that you can tell that English is not their first language, you know, particularly where they're from, geographically, all this sort of stuff. So that is all kind of taken into account when reviewing proposals. And so, you know, just having that local involvement, and again, you know, going back to Axel's question about what we look for continued funding, is to have those systems in place, right? We want commitment to sites. You know, we want our funding to be able to leverage other funding to then have that commitment to those sites, because that's been demonstrated time and time again in conservation, where we have these long-term projects at sites. That's when we start to see impact. So yeah, I think it's actually kind of fairly clear, having kind of managed the Small Cat Action Fund now since kind of 2014. I've become quite accustomed to kind of reviewing these kinds of applications, as I'm sure Nicholas and Joe has as well. But yeah, you can kind of start to tease apart these you know, proposals that are quite clearly just kind of projects that are one-off, and others that include the appropriate stakeholders, in this case, kind of local communities, and have that longevity plan.
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
I think it does help, Ming. And one thing is, I'm just reflecting on, I'm a judge for the St. Andrews Prize for the Environment, where we award up to $100,000 as well. And the one of the things in the evolution of that process, as you talk about looking at these things over time, has been the question of how much AI is used or should be used in applications. On the one hand, we've experienced that you just get something that's totally AI generated. On the other hand, especially in terms of language and such, it can be useful. Are there any opinions, Nicholas or Joe, in terms of, you know, are you against it? Are you for it? What's our advice?
Thank you, Axel, and thank you, Cindy, for bringing up the question. If I may just quickly, Axel, just regarding to the local versus sort of international question as well that Cindy brought. So yes, I think, you know, on a small grants level, we want to support local people, and I agree with Ming as regards language, that we try to take this into account during the review process. We would prefer to support local people who will be in situ long term. But I think we also have to appreciate that there is knowledge and experience that can also come in and help to develop local capacity. So I think in any application, there has to be a bit of a balance and understanding that there is sometimes opportunity to bring in new knowledge and experience to a local context. As regards AI, this is something we've been grappling with. We've had more and more AI-generated applications, or parts of applications that are AI-generated. In principle, we can completely understand why that would help and be the case, in particular for people for whom English is not a first language. But again, I think this is in common with a lot of different fields, that we try to see AI as a tool rather than anything else, to help people write better proposals, as opposed to help people develop better projects. And I think for us, there's a little bit of there's a difference there. I think the project is what someone is going to undertake and actually work on the ground, the work that they're going to do. And that, I think, is something that is the individual or the group of individuals and their actions and activities. I think the proposal is something else. A good proposal would reflect a good project. I think the challenge is to have a good project that would be that maybe someone is not able to properly express because English isn't their first language, and to use AI in a way that really expresses that good project in a way that comes across to the reviewer. And so that's a slightly complex kind of answer, because, to be honest, we haven't fully figured out yet what to do about AI, and it's something that we're very much still thinking about. But we don't want to exclude it. We want to see that, yes, there are benefits and advantages to it, but there are also limitations to how comfortable we feel about applicants using it. And we're not quite sure where that line is at the moment. Excuse me, sorry, that's a missile alert.
No, you know, and no, that's very helpful. And if you can believe, I mean, these panels are so incredible, and there's lots of interest. And Jonas, I saw you put your hand up too, but I'm afraid we'll need to ask you to write it in the Q&A. And in fact, we're at the end of our time already. that said, you know, if I can ask for one succinct message, one sentence or two, one piece of advice or encouragement from each of you, let's see how we do. Joe.
I would say the majority of your applications will probably get rejected, and that's just the way it is because of competition. Don't be downhearted, try again, and if you were given feedback, please implement the feedback.
Amazing. Ming.
Yeah, that was a really good one, Joe. Yeah, I was so reiterating that one, but also kind of following off the back of the AI thing. We want to fund you, not an AI bot. So, you know, even if it's written by yourself, we want some of that personality coming through. You know, like I said, we want local people. But yes, reiterating Joe, we receive for $100,000 grant, we receive, you know, over 100, you know, grant applications asking for over $1 million. It's impossible to kind of fund all of you, so we only fund about 10%. You will get rejected, but just keep trying, and at some point, if you have a good project that you're applying with, you know, one that really kind of connects to the objectives and the mission of whatever grant program that you're applying to, just hang in there, and you will be successful at some point.
Nicholas, final word for us.
I would agree with both of the above. I'd say it's very competitive. But keep trying, keep at it. I think a well-designed project will eventually win through after, even if it is after repeated efforts. I think that funders want to fund, they want to support, they want to enable, and they want to help conservationists do conservation. And so I would take that as a piece of encouragement that we want to help. We're not trying to be difficult when we turn you down.
Yeah. And just I'm going to make an appeal to the funders themselves. It takes more time, especially on rejected applications, to give feedback. But sometimes it can be a complete mystery. Why was I rejected? And so if it is possible even just to give 2 or 3 main lines, even if it takes extra time, I think that can help to encourage, you know, people to try again and apply again. So thank you for that. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. I mean, we could go all day. And there's lots of good feedback happening here in emojis and other comments. Terrific. And indeed, again, what an amazing day as well. Here we have just gone through day 3. And thank you, Ming, Nicholas, Joe, for ending it on such an inspirational, useful high note. Excellent. All right. And that brings us to the end of day 3. We do have another day to go. And again, I don't know how you're feeling, but I feel so inspired by everything that I'm hearing from around the world. You know, all of you are making change happen. And that's what it takes. We are a community, we're a force. If we're not going to change, you know, things, and if we're not going to be the ones that fight the hard fight to help these small cats, then who is? So let's find a way to support each other, to do science, to understand, and to do conservation action that makes a difference for the small cats that have no voice of their own, but need our help. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.